Hello, and welcome to Mapping The College Audition. I'm your host, Charlie Murphy, director of MTCA. That's Musical Theater College Auditions. Check us out at mtca.com. And today we've got Amanda Flynn from Pace University on the pod. For our newer listeners, this is another one of our college deep dive episodes where we explore the landscape of the college theater world and try to demystify this daunting audition process. And it's another one of our Act 2 episodes, updating an episode from a few years back with Jesse Carlo. I do tell Amanda in the episode, I think at the beginning, that like kind of with Aubrey at CCM, this almost will feel like an Act 3 episode. For those who don't know, Aubrey was a longtime head of CCM a long time ago, but this will feel kind of like an Act 3 episode in that, you know, we can kind of feel the presence of Amy Rogers, who was the longtime head of Pace, and then the tenure of Jesse Carlo, which at least that episode was somewhat in reaction to Amy's departure. And then here is Amanda representing a new era for Pace. It's so interesting also because just like Rachel Stevens from CCM, who was our Act 3, though really our Act 2, an MTCA alum, now Amanda, Act 3 and MTCA alum. It's kind of a beautiful symmetry there between these two schools. So as always, you know, we'd invite you to please check out that episode with Jesse if you want a bit of the history. But really, this episode, in the sort of bridge to the Act 3, we really focus on the future and the kind of current era of Pace. We don't go as far back as we do in the previous episode. And as I mentioned, that Amanda is a former MTCA coach. It always makes it just extra special for me. And maybe even more so, we did this interview on MLK Day. So both of our children were home from school. And Amanda has a 3-year-old, and of course, I have a 4.5-year-old. And both of our kids made little brief appearances during the break, sort of midway through the pod. So it's kind of fun for us to get to reconnect in that way. And Amanda's husband also was an MTCA coach, the great Rob Rokicki, author or writer of the Lightning Thief musical. And I will just say, this is a really great time for us to be releasing this episode, as so many of our students this very weekend auditioned for Pace during New York City Unifieds in the middle of a snowstorm. Pace was sending all of our families these wonderful communications, emails and texts and everything that just kept saying, the show must go on. This is happening. And go on it did. We had such a lovely time in the MTCA green room. We're hanging out with parents and students. We had some coaches were there. We heard some amazing audition stories, some awesome walk-in triumphs, and all of us were just there, que sera-seraing with the weather. What can we do, right? This, I honestly think, this might have been my favorite green room we've had in like over a decade. The energy was just wonderful. The families were really appreciative, which of course means a lot for us. And I think for the most part, we're handling the stress really ably. I didn't see a lot of freakouts, which often we do in the green room, have some, but for this, you would have understood why you'd be freaking out on this weekend. But generally, people were dealing with it really well, both in the green room and then in our WhatsApp group. We also have a private WhatsApp group with all of our families navigating and just watching them all help each other and, you know, give information and cheer each other on. It was just all so wonderful. And as always, I've said this before, but I do so appreciate the many people who did come up and give me a little podcast love. I love to know that you listen, how you listen, all of that. It really does mean the world to me when you stop and say hi. I will say, with the weather craziness, I decided not to record New York City green room interviews this year. But fear not, I will be bringing my equipment to Chicago, which is where I do normally most of the green room interviews anyway. Often I go kind of light on New York City. Other years I've also skipped it as well. You know, it's sometimes the pace of it in the 2 days and students are still really figuring it out, you know, what they're doing, and the pace of it just can feel a little bit like, I don't want to be intrusive to the process. I want these to feel like extra. If I can sneak you into the corner and do it because you're having fun, great, but I never want to like interrupt your process and be like, jump on the podcast. You know, whereas I do think in Chicago, certainly with the longer period of time and you're already in the hotel, and then by LA, certainly, you know, many students and families will have had a few moments to kind of reflect and to breathe, and it'll feel like, sure, I'm fun. This is fun. Let's jump in and do it. So we'll definitely do that in Chicago. I will get you some good content. I've heard from some of you this year, and I've heard it before, that you really like that green room episode. So fear not, it will still come. Again, assuming the technology cooperates. I'm saying that in advance of having actually recorded it, but let's say we will record it. All right, let's dive into this episode since it is already so long. I will see many of you this weekend at our private auditions in Chicago with CCM in Oklahoma City, and then at Chicago Unifieds itself. Oh my, we'll be there all week. And then we will have still a regular episode that'll be releasing on Wednesday, though I'm going to record the intro to that this week. And then we're going to fly off to LA for our private auditions with Texas State and Cal State Fullerton, followed by LA Unifieds themselves. It's a lot, a big couple weeks we got going on. So if you've got some travel yourselves in the next few weeks, which I know many of our seniors do, maybe it's a great time to catch up on some old pods, do some scrolling and do some clicking. And if nothing else, you could just use this time to give us that rating and review that you've been waiting so long to give us, but that you know you want to give us so that more families can keep discovering the wonder that is mapping the college audition at MTCA. And until then, enjoy this episode with Amanda Flynn from PACE. Well, we are so excited to be joined by Amanda Flynn. Amanda is a woman of unbelievable education. Normally we read it all, but this is like one of the first times we actually are going to do highlights even on the education. She has a BS from the New School. She has an MM in vocal performance with a musical theater concentration from NYU, a doctorate in education from Columbia, advanced certification in vocal pedagogy from NYU, a certificate in vocology from the University of Utah. And that's not even all of her education. It's unbelievable. As a performer, she's been in like Oklahoma first national tour, the Las Vegas company of Mamma Mia, the LA company of Wicked. She is also a star Broadway vocal coach, where she's most recently worked for Operation Mincemeat and Stranger Things, and previously was vocal coach for shows like The Lightning Thief, to which she has a personal connection, and Be More Chill. She also wrote a book called So You Want to Sing Musical Theater, and is the program head of musical theater at Pace University. And most importantly of all, of course, Amanda, as well as her husband, Rob Rokicki, are both former MTCA coaches, the greatest education of all. We're almost done with your bio, Amanda. My God. Pace, which we will remember, of course, is still located in New York City. They take classes of about 32 each coming year, and they offer different degrees. You offer a BFA in MT, which we'll talk about especially today, but then a BFA in acting, a BFA in acting for film and media, BFA in commercial dance, etc. Amanda, officially welcome on the show. How are you doing today?
Thank you so much, Charlie. I'm doing well. I am doing well.
That bio is a mouthful. You got
Well,
too much education this is an education podcast, and that was too much.
listen, I know. What can I say? I like to learn things.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Now, so I keep wanting to introduce this episode as our Act 3. I don't know why I think of it like it's an Act 3,
Oh,
because, we had Jesse Carlo on right after the sort of Amy Rogers era
huh?
of Pace. But of course, based on the time, we didn't actually have Amy Rogers on. But I really do think, like, I'm hoping it can be both an Act 2/Act 3, but really also, I just want to hear about Pace in 2026 in the Amanda Flynn era. So, with any of our Act 2 and Act 3 episodes, I do always invite our listeners, please do listen back. You're going to hear additional info. You'll hear that snapshot of where we were in that particular moment post-COVID and sort of in the transition from Amy. You'll hear that with Jesse. But now we're going to talk about the transition out of Jesse and into Amanda, and really get a state of pace of kind of where we are. Plus, of course, I mentioned you being a former MTCAer. So we're going to get some bonus stuff from all your billion degrees and all your MTCA experience, all that kind of stuff. But before we do all that, I want to at least open the floor for you before we
Yeah.
sort of dive into our paces and just talk about like your journey. I've read that little bit of a bio, but your journey to Pace. How did we end up here in terms of sort of the Amanda Flynn journey?
Yeah. Well, I'm from Texas originally. And I started college in Texas. I was a vocal performance major at Baylor
You're
University.
saying there's education I missed. I missed part of your education, is what you're
Listen,
saying.
that's okay. I didn't get a degree.
Unbelievable.
Um,
Unbelievable.
and I was vocal performance major, and I was just, really antsy. I didn't
Yeah.
want to be doing it. Now I know I have ADHD, so it all makes sense as to why when I was like, I don't want to sing opera, I want to be on Broadway.
Yeah.
So I struck a deal with my parents, and the deal was that I was going to come to New York for the summer, and did the Cap 21. This doesn't exist anymore, unfortunately, but the Cap 21 6-week summer professional program, which was
Yeah.
a 6-week conservatory program in the summer that was designed for college students or students like recently out of college. So
Mhm.
lots of like 18 to 25-year-olds. And I said, I'm going to go do this program and I'm going to stay in New York for 6 weeks. And if I feel like I'm ready, I want to stay in New York and not come home.
Uh-huh.
If I feel like I'm not ready, I'll come back and finish school. And they
Uh-huh.
said, okay. And so I did that program and never went home. Well, I went home and packed my stuff and came back and got an apartment and then went on tour. And so then I performed, for the next 8, 10 years or so, and had a, great, lovely performing career. But I started to run into problems with my voice at one point in my career. And it was a really big turning point for me. I went sort of, on like a deep dive of trying to figure out what was going on. And I sort of unlocked the voice nerd side of myself that
Uh-huh.
I didn't know existed. And so then that led to going to get my master's, but I had to finish my undergrad first. So I finished my undergrad as an adult and then went and did my master's. And then I started teaching. And I always just say that I just ended up being accidentally retired from performing because I never was like, okay, this is it. This is the end. I just sort of gradually sort of shifted over and I graduated from NYU and got a job at Cap 21 right at the time. This was when they just had a 2-year program.
Yep.
Started teaching there and then was there for the beginning of the Malloy program. And I started teaching at Pace fall 2016. And I was teaching voice in all these places as an adjunct. So I was brought on at Pace fall of 2016 as an adjunct and was balancing my time between Cap 21 and Pace. And then decided to just sort of move over fully to Pace just to sort of be in one place.
Yep.
I'm the type of person that, I like in my academic life, I like being at one place where I'm sort of like committed and like fully supporting and committed into the program, which is why the sort of like natural shift for me there has been natural.
Yep.
But so I moved fully over to Pace by 2019 and was an adjunct and started doing a little bit of an admin, still as an adjunct, but sort of part-time during our sort of transitional times, the pandemic years, 2021 through 2022, was sort of in a little bit of a leadership role, but somewhat part-time. And then I stepped into a full-time position fall 2023. So
Yep.
this is my third year full-time and third year as program head, because at the time in 2023, we became our own school, which
Yep.
I'm sure is something Jesse probably talked about when he was on the podcast, but
Yep.
we became the Sands College. And so it shifted our structure. So Jesse, who had been hired to be program head and had done a year as program head, became chair of both musical theater and commercial dance. So then I moved into the program head position. So that's that. And then I did my doctorate in there. I wrote a book in there. I've worked on 5 or 6 Broadway shows in
Had a
there.
kid in there.
Um,
A lot.
you
Yeah.
know, all
Yeah.
of the other, all of the things. I have a private studio, so I feel very fortunate. I will say this out of the gate is I feel incredibly fortunate that I am able to feel fully like I have one foot fully in academia and in the professional industry, and then I don't have to sacrifice one for the other.
Yep.
And like I just know how fortunate I am to be able to do that because, oftentimes when you really are entrenched in academia, the professional stuff has to kind of go to the wayside. And so,
It's so true, and there's so much good juice in there. I want to circle back at the end because I have some questions about sort of
yeah,
Broadway vocal coaching, so I want to get a
yeah,
little bit more
for
into that,
sure.
probably in
Yeah.
our third act here. But I mean, what I'll just underline in my experience of knowing you, I mean, you sort of describe the image of this person who is a nerd, meaning I want to like approach things as a student, but also then I think just like your utter competence in all these situations means you very quickly become a learner and then also a mentor and then a leader. Like it's just that makes sense in terms of hearing that progression in multiple places where people go, well, yeah, you're like, I can take on more and now I can do this. And then all of a sudden you're
Yeah.
running the place. Like not surprising to me in watching your journey there to be like, yeah, of course that would make sense. Why wouldn't they keep elevating Amanda? Yeah, absolutely.
I
Um,
appreciate that, Charlie.
well, let's talk about a little bit about pace, and I love the experience both in terms of you've of course had with your time with MTCA seen students auditioning for all these places. You'd worked at other places. What do you think makes pace in contradistinction to other schools? What makes pace unique? What makes pace in terms of its place on the landscape?
Um, I think of a few things that come to mind, when people ask this question. And I think sort of like the way I can sort of generally sum up like a couple of the things sort of with an umbrella concept is that I think that we do a really nice job of um, really being connected to the industry in very like real, tangible ways that really provide our students with real connections and networks, and so they really are graduating having a community of people and already having really high level artists that they've worked with, that they have a connection to through the university.
Yeah.
Obviously our faculty, I'm not alone in how I'm able to sort of balance academia and the professional industry.
Yeah.
We can say that for much of our faculty, right? They're working, they're working individuals, they work in their own field, whatever it might be.
You just mentioned El Morgan Lee, who we had on as an
Morgan
artist
Lee.
guest, right? That's an
Yeah,
artist. We had her on that matter as an artist guest, but also now full faculty.
one of our full-time faculty members. Yeah. So we, El Morgan has taught in our program for a couple of years, and we were really fortunate that we were able to move her into a full-time faculty position for this academic year. And she's just absolutely wonderful, and just an amazing human, but just such a wonderful, compassionate educator.
Yeah.
And she's just so beloved by our students. So, but that's a great example, right? And my associate program head, JV Mercanti, who is, a casting director and a director, he's
Yeah.
working professionally all the time. And so I think it happens with the faculty, but it's not just the faculty, it's the guests, it's the artists that we bring in through our
Yes.
artist in residence program. We have partnerships with Disney, and we have a new work partnership with Lively McCabe, which is a production company. And so, we're really trying to make sure that our students are getting a chance to work with people that can give them jobs later.
Yep. It's such a
Flat
great
out.
answer. And I think, so often I ask schools about, what sort of makes them unique, and they'll give me answers, and, of course every school is in its way unique, but
Of
I do
course.
think Pace has a more clear, distinct lane than some other schools, both via location, but also via some of the sort of choices that Pace has made.
Yeah.
I loved, if let's get a little granular on the one you just said, which was, Jesse had talked about on his episode that they were continuing basically what Amy Rogers had started, which is a pretty unique approach to students working while they're in school. In 2026, is the goal, is that continuing with Pace, that basically to describe a student who might be a freshman or sophomore who might book a Broadway show and then continue their Pace education while in a Broadway show, which with most schools, it might mean basically like you're leaving, you could come back, but basically how does that work? Can you talk a little bit about where that is now in terms of active working?
Yeah, so PACE just as a university, this is not us, this is just the university, has something called the prior learning assessment. And the prior learning assessment is essentially where you can receive course credit for real life work that you've done. And so that course, is particularly great for, like, let's say adults who are returning to school, such as myself. When I chose to go to grad school, I had to go finish my undergrad, right? So, things like that are great to say, hey, we can get you up to a certain amount of credits for the life work you've done, right? We can tie it into courses, right? So we use that course often for students who do need to leave. You can receive up to 15 credits for that course through that course. And so that is one way that we are able to support students leaving. So right now we have two juniors, both their sophomore year. One did the Hills of California on Broadway, so she took a leave for the fall semester. The other did the Parade National Tour in the spring. She took a leave in the spring. So those are examples of students that each took us a leave for the spring. When they came back, they took the prior learning assessment class, and in that class, you essentially work with a mentor who helps you craft this portfolio, where you're able to sort of like essentially write this sort of like project about how you've sort of received you've met those learning objectives through your work that you've done. So
Yep.
typically when a student has a situation like that, where let's say they're doing a Broadway show or a tour, we know they're going to leave. We sit down and we look at what they're going to miss. We figure out what classes we're going to get them credit for the prior learning assessment, so that we can then slide them right back in and they
Yep.
sort of stay on track. So that's one way that we're able to do that. And we're really fortunate that that exists through the university, and we take advantage of it, and it works really great. When sometimes students have smaller things that they have to, smaller commitments, let's say new works or things that might be like 1 or 2 weeks of missing class. And those become sort of like case by case,
Yeah.
situations. But we do try to make space for that, especially for the upperclassmen. The
Yeah.
reality is it's just pretty impossible freshman year to
Right.
like leave and go do a show and then come back, because it's so foundational, and you can't do anything until you have a GPA, and you don't have a GPA until December. So,
Uh-huh.
it's a little tough when people, when it's freshman year. But the further we go, our program is sort of set up so that we can support. We have other ways of supporting as well for students to work.
Yeah.
Which is through like internships and things. We have a senior who this last fall was doing Baker's Wife off Broadway. And so we were able to get him credit for some of his classes that he wasn't going to be able to attend through like an internship, where essentially he was working with a faculty member to sort of make his like rehearsal and performance experience into some sort of tangible thing that was graded, right, and receive credit for that. And so, these are all things that we're able to do. That same senior, we were able to work it out for him to graduate early because he's doing a Broadway show in the spring. We have another senior this spring who'll be leaving the semester a few weeks early to go lead a new musical out of town. And so, it's a thing where I think like our goal is for our students to work,
Yep.
right? That's what we want for them. We want them to graduate and be able to sustain a life in this industry.
Yep.
And so when large opportunities come along, we try to find ways to support it. And yes, sometimes it means they have to take a leave, right?
Sure.
It can't always mean that they can stay in school and do both. Sometimes it's like, yeah, you're going to have to take a leave, right? But depending on how long the leave is, we might be able to slide you back in. You might graduate late. We have a student right now who's on tour, and he took the whole year off to go on tour. He'll come back next year and, go into his senior year, which would have been this year. And so it just, really every case, every situation is different, but we do try to support it when the work is substantial enough
Yeah.
that it changes the graduation outcome. That's sort
Yeah.
of the way that I view it. These Broadway shows, national tours, new work that's being developed that has legs, as we say, is like on the path, to get to become a big thing. But we can't support everything, right?
Of course.
If it's a regional theater thing, we tell people to pass, but we try to support it because it feels incorrect to say you can't do that Broadway show.
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know
Well, and not necessarily effective. I mean, it's where I think what's not unique about PACE is the idea that each situation be handled individually. I think having that conversation certainly makes sense, and other schools will do that too. It just seems like that what seems unique is the tenor of it is we're going to try to make this work for you and make it work, as opposed to not that other schools would never do that, but they're more going to lean toward discouraging and going,
Yeah.
oh man, if I love you said to work and to graduate are the goals, but you even said it in that order. Whereas I feel like other schools, they care about the work, but they're like, we're first trying to graduate you, and
Yeah.
then we'll
And
worry about leaving.
certainly, I mean, look, this senior Mason Olshavsky, who just did Baker's Wife, he's the one that, we sort of made it work. He was a transfer student. So he had already done like 2 years of school before he even came to us. And it was in like biology or something. So he had to start over as a freshman. So
Yeah, yeah,
he's on like year 6 of school.
yeah.
So
He's on the Amanda
he was
Flynn
sort of
path,
like, I don't know if I should
right?
finish. And I was like, you are going to finish. Like, come hell or high water, you are getting your degree. You are so close.
Yeah,
I'm going to do everything
yeah,
I can do in the computer on the back end to get you graduated as soon as we can because you are so close. I'm not going to let you quit. So that's a case where I'm like, I demand you graduate. I want all of our students to graduate, right? I
Totally.
want them to finish that. I want them to feel accomplished and like they've, they have achieved that. I want them to. And the reality is that like, like we rarely have students that don't graduate. I mean, we just graduated a student this past fall, who took a year, 2 years off to go do Jagged Little Pill and then came back and like, right, was like in and out because she was doing work out of town. And so like had to sort of slow down, but she
Yep.
finally graduated and she felt so accomplished, even though it took her like 6.5 years because she did, 2 years of a Broadway show in there and then like another new work out of town. But it's like, yeah, we're going to support it as much as we can. And everyone's going to be on their own timeline. And she was fine with the timeline because look at all the amazing stuff she got to do. And then she got to graduate with all of this stuff on her resume and all of these experiences. So, yeah, we really try to balance it. I think the other thing that I'll add is the reason it's also always a conversation is that typically, when our students are first starting, college and they're freshmen, sophomores, every job looks shiny,
Right.
right? Every job looks amazing. And so that's why we have to have these conversations of like, hey, this is not a job that I would recommend taking a
Right.
leave for. And
Right.
given the dates you would need to take a leave, we always tell them it's always your call. We will support you no matter what. But, we try to like really be that sort of slightly more bird's eye view. We've all been doing this a long time and we can say that's a job worth leaving school for.
Yeah.
That will have a really different impact on you when you graduate than
Yeah.
this job that seems amazing and seems like it pays you so much money right now, but that it's actually not that much, not that
Yeah.
much money. Yeah.
Totally makes sense. That's, I think, a really great encapsulation of that. And I think, will be attractive to a certain kind of students, and some students to go, I know I want 4 years and I don't want to mess around. But to, I think, a certain kind of student that is, it's really exciting. I think it's true of pace. Can we talk a little bit about curriculum in terms of, Jesse gave us a bit of curriculum and some intended changes that was, around the sort of post-COVID transition. Where are we in 2026 with sort of what the 4 years of curriculum look like? And also, as much as, now you're in your third year as program head, do you have any big intended changes for the next decade?
I think we're sort of continually like tweaking things, and adjusting things. I would say that right now there's no like giant curricular changes.
Yep.
There's talks, with the university in general about making some adjustments to the core curriculum. And if that were to happen, we would potentially have more credits like back to us taken away that we would be able to perhaps add some courses to the curriculum.
Uh-huh.
But right now, we've been just making all sorts of tweaks and adjustments. Sort of the two that come to mind that we have sort of just implemented this school year is some adjustments in our dance classes as far as um, tap. Our juniors take tap in the fall, and with this year, the way we do all of our dance classes, I'll just say, is that all of our dance classes rotate. So whatever dance class you're in, you are leveled, and then you rotate between two teachers. So if you're in ballet or jazz, you're leveled, but then you spend a certain amount of time with one teacher, then you rotate to the other teacher for a certain amount, and then you rotate back, right? So that's how they're all structured. So for our tap class this past fall, we decided to combine with commercial dance.
Hmm.
So we now have combined musical theater and commercial dance together for tap, and we now have 4 sections. And so you rotate through 4 sections. And what's really good about this is that tap is just a little bit of an outlier when it comes to dance, right? You can be maybe, a more beginning dancer, but a
Yeah.
really good tapper,
Yeah.
and vice versa, right? You could be a commercial dance major and not be a great tapper, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it is just a little bit of a specialty thing. So it made the most sense to combine there.
Yeah.
And so what's great is now we have 4 sections. So we can have like a true beginner section, like the I've never seen a tap shoe section,
Yeah.
and then like a true advanced section, right? And then we can have sort of the advanced beginner and the intermediate in the middle versus having to just split down the middle where we end up with like a couple of amazing tappers that are just not being challenged, right? Because we're sort of in, sort of like sections of advanced beginner. So that was so effective, and it's so wonderful for the students to be in class with other students, right? To get to share space with commercial dancers, because they're all of our programs in SANS are so specialized and like maxed out. We're using everything we got, every credit we can to get everything in. And so there's just not a lot of space for, classes that combine things beyond electives, right? And then the other changes is we're implementing it this spring for the first time, which is similar, which is for a class that we have called Dance Styles. And this is a course that we've had in the musical theater curriculum, where historically this was the one dance class where all of the MTs danced together. They weren't sectioned out. And that's because the idea of this class is staging larger dance numbers, and teaching students how to swing, so that we're staging larger dance numbers through the semester. And there's, students are on a rotation of swinging. And so it allows everyone to learn how to swing. And it really is more focused on, staging of the large numbers, ideally like some iconic dance numbers, in the musical theater canon. So we have now also combined with commercial dance this spring. So this will be our first semester doing it. So it's also our juniors, and it is their commercial dance seniors. And so that's the idea of the class. And so the reason that we wanted to combine in this class as well is because so many of our commercial dancers and musical theater students work together out in the industry, right? Because they're they end up in Broadway shows together and things. And so we want both programs to be challenged in that our musical theater students are going to have to be up dancing next to the commercial dancers, and the commercial dancers are going to have to be sitting in music rehearsal with the musical theater majors, right? And so they're going to have to really have to both hopefully sort of rise to the level around them. And so we're really excited about it. And so this is happening for the first time this spring. And it should be really great. What I love about this class is that I'm excited about the integration between the programs, because I think it's going to be, really exciting. But the thing that I love about this class, that I've always loved about it, is that it is the class where our students do get to swing. And I think that's something that's kind of unique. Many of our students get to this point and they've already swung shows, so they sort of learned on the job. But for those that haven't, this is a class where, they go on a swing rotation and they have to swing a number and swing in and out during class. And so,
just for our newer listeners, when we say swing, you're talking about covering, not swing dancing. You're talking about covering each other's.
Sorry. Yeah, I'm talking about the swings, those that cover the ensemble, right? So the idea now is that, swinging the choreography might not be a big deal for the commercial dance majors, but how about swinging the harmonies? That the ensemble is singing, right? And sort of opposite for the MTs, right? So I think it's going to be really exciting.
It's the part as a young person that I understood the idea of what it was to understudy a lead role, and I'd be in the company, but the thinking of but I have to understudy all the different other parts in this dance, those people who do that and the way their brains work is.
I know it's crazy. I know it's a lot. It's a lot. But I love that we have a class that makes space for that, especially for those students that know they want to be swings, that that is what they know they want to do. They're I want to dance captain and swing. Then what a great class where they get to kind of gain some skills there and get some practice and having to go through some of those things.
For sure. And you're going to work. I want to do two quick bird's eye views of the curriculum. So you mentioned the idea of what core curriculum could eventually come over to be part of SANS. Right now, if you had to give a percentage, how much time is spent in the acting, singing, dancing, in the sort of BFA of it all versus how much time is spent outside doing non-major things at Pace?
Yeah, I should probably have those numbers for you. I would have to look up because I cannot remember how many credits are required in the core. But I would say most of our students are taking 1 to 2 academics every semester.
1 to 2 academic classes. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's going to vary a ton based on what they come in with. Some will come in with credit. They'll come in with IB or AP. They'll test out of language, right? Some people will come in and not, have done a lot. And so they may get to senior year and go part-time because they only have MT classes, right? We have a part-time senior right now because, she, didn't need to take anything else. Some students will come in with nothing. Some will have a minor, some won't. So that can vary.
Do you have a sense of how many students get minors and do any students get double majors?
We can't do double majors. It would be pretty impossible,
Yeah.
but you can do a minor. And I will say a large chunk of our students do minors. I don't know the percentage. Wayne Petro would know that number, but we have lots of minors because you can do that, right? That is definitely doable,
Yeah.
as long as you can handle a slightly higher academic load, but again, it depends on what you come in with. When
Yeah.
students come in with already 12 college credits, then that
Doing my-
opens up so much room for a minor very easily. But
yeah.
students can come in with nothing and still do a minor. So
Yep. And then just from we talked a little bit, it happened to have talked about dance a decent amount in the curriculum of it all. From an overview, do you feel like you have a focus that either that Pace is known for, that you really feel of the three, acting, singing, dancing, that you spend more time of the way you're thinking about curriculum? I know you yourself, of course, are a vocal expert.
yeah,
But in terms of like Pace as a school, is it really trying to be equal all three? Does it feel there's one leaning more, two leaning more?
I mean, curricularly, it's really balanced.
Yeah.
Um, Obviously, if you minor in commercial dance,
Right.
you're going to
You
have more
create more
dance.
weight for yourself. Yeah.
It
Sure.
may not feel balanced because you have more dance,
Yeah.
but that's really because of the minor. But it really, like, on paper, is very balanced. You're in one dance class a semester, except for spring junior year where you have ballet and dance styles, right?
Yeah.
You have two dance classes that semester. Um, you are in an acting class every semester. You are in voice lessons every semester. Um, you have a 3 semester sequence in there of your sort of acting the song sequence, 2 semesters of tech, which is musical theater technique, which is our acting the song class with Erin Dilly, who we love, and then 1 semester of musical scene study with L. Morgan Lee, right? So that's sort of a 3 semester sequence, if you will. We have 2 semesters of musical theater history and rep, which is a musical theater history class that is a year-long class that is musical theater history sort of through repertoire. And so students are still getting up and performing and presenting repertoire that goes along with the historical context. So those classes are kind of the sort of integrated classes, and that they are like, history and rep is like sort of a performance class, but it's, it's not like a
Kind of
deep
academic.
performance
Yeah.
really about the history, but it's sort of like musical theater history with a performance element. And then the other ones are your sort of integrated acting and singing. But, outside of that, it's really quite balanced. I think personally, as far as like what we're like known for, that I don't know.
Yeah.
That's
Well, what
hard.
about
That's hard for me to say. I mean, I know like some things, but I don't know that it's necessarily curricularly based,
yeah,
like I know what people say they like about a PACE grad, but
yeah, not necessarily acting, singing, dancing based
yeah,
different.
it's more about some of the stuff like the connections, the sort of
Yeah,
like industry smarts,
yeah,
the like they know who they are. They
yeah.
graduate already like, kind of like a little ahead, I think,
From an
of
industry
as
savvy
far as like, yeah,
perspective.
like, knowing how to navigate things,
Yeah,
like things like that. I feel like, they graduate very ready,
yeah,
very,
yeah.
very ready.
Totally makes sense. And then just before we leave the different degrees, you mentioned hey, they're pretty full. There's not a lot of room for interaction. How does it like? So if I'm an MT major, I'm not taking acting class with the actors for the most part.
You are not. The only exception to that would be like an elective, right? So like, you're not going to get into any of the acting major classes. No. But we have like stage combat and clowning and like audiobook narration and
Which you can take as
there
an
are
MT.
I'm sorry.
As an MT, you could take
You can take
audiobook
those are
narration as an
electives,
elective.
yeah, so those are all electives that we have, and so that just depends, so the curriculum has a set amount of electives, so if you choose to do a minor, your electives basically become your minor,
Right.
right? So you might not have space to take some of those
Maybe
things,
not
but
literal
the
minor,
student
but I want
yeah,
extra film class, or I want
yeah.
something else in my
Totally.
Yep.
The students that choose to not minor usually end up just like filling up on all of the like electives, right? Musical theater writing, all of those types of classes, because then you can really kind of branch out a little bit from just the MT stuff. We do have our foundations of the artist class, which is a newer class that all freshmen take their first semester. And that class is integrated with programs. So like that class is not divided by major. So you may be be in class with an acting major and a production and design major and a stage manager. You'll be in class with all sorts of folks there.
Yeah. I wanted to make sure we hit a little bit on, we mentioned the ability to work, and you mentioned like JV and people who are connected to the industry as a casting director. I'd love to talk kind of about the showcase experience, but also, sort of how as you prepare them for that launch into business, if their PACE students are known to be very savvy and ahead of the game business wise, sort of how does that happen in terms of the curricular preparation? And then also in terms of like, are many of the students getting agents as a sophomore and a junior and stuff like that? Are you making those connections sooner, given that you're in the New York City of it all? And how does that work in terms of how you're sort of linking
Sure.
to the industry?
Well, before I answer that question, I will say something I was going to say earlier, but we moved on from it. All this talk about like working professionally and everything. We also have students that never go on a single professional audition until they graduate. So just know, like, if you're listening and you're like, "Ooh, I don't know that I'm ready for that," totally okay. I'm constantly reminding our students, like, you don't need to do anything. Just go to school, right? You don't need to do anything. Just because your classmate has an agent and had an appointment for outsiders doesn't mean you're behind, right? So I'm constantly saying that because that I think is the downside of having students that like come in with agents, right? And they've worked
And it will feel
professionally
different.
as a kid,
Other
right?
schools, with the other schools, they won't have that same level of feeling competitive energy because they'll be going,
Exactly.
nobody, we're all just here in school. Like, yeah.
Totally. And even if you had one kid maybe that was getting appointments for stuff, like you're not in New York City. So it's just like it's the compounding factor of like being in New York and there's a lot of it happening. And so I'm always reminding them you don't need to do anything, right? This is an okay place to be. This is a great place to be to never audition for anything, right? One of our graduates a couple of years ago booked a Broadway show right out of school. She had to miss showcase because it was her first day of rehearsal. And she literally said, I'm so glad I never auditioned
Right.
while I was in school
Ready yet.
because I
Yeah.
was so ready to do this
Yep.
now that I'm graduating. So that's
Yep.
my like side note there.
Totally.
So our students, how do these things happen? Well, one is senior year in the fall, they take the business of the industry with Pat Goodwin, who's an amazing casting director for Telsey. And he's amazing. And it's an incredible class where they really learn a lot of just sort of business smarts, everything from like how to do your taxes to like agent meetings
Yeah.
and reels and self tapes and practical stuff. So that's a really amazing class. And they also senior year have the entire year with me, and so they have audition technique in the fall while they're in the business class, right? So there's a lot of connections because we're working on audition skills. We're working on building your book. We're working on really less about building your book and more about understanding how to build a book, I will
Yep.
say. And we're doing a lot of like talking about the industry, talking about how we navigate rejection, talking about how we build our community. How do we be sustainable artists? How do we not burn out? How do we set goals for ourselves? How do we, all of the things that like I feel like young people need as they're starting, their career because they don't quite know what it's going to be like to really be out there, and it's going to be so different for every single one of them, right? Some will book huge things right away. Some might not work for 2 years. And so I want them to really feel like they're prepared. So we do a lot of that senior year. And I really try to graduate students ready to be like self-sustained, if that makes sense. Like if I get an agent, great. If I don't, also great. I know how to move through this industry like as like the CEO of my business, right? And people will jump on board and jump off board as I drive the train here, but like I kind of know how to like keep it going. And so like that's a little bit of my goal senior year is to get to where they feel like okay, I sort of have a sense of what I'm going to do here, and I have a sense of how to pivot and navigate, and I understand like who my mentors are and who to lean on as I sort of I still get texts from graduates who are like, "Hey, what do you think about this? Like, how do I go about doing this?" Right? And so I like being that resource for folks. I think that's also another advantage of being in New York is that,
For sure.
those
Communities here.
faculty mentors, they're there. They're still here, you can still go and reach out to your, that junior acting teacher that you loved, that
Uh-huh.
you really like respect their opinion, and you've got these. It's not that you can't do that with other schools, right? But it's just, being in New York can sometimes feel different. So that's what I'll say there, as far as like how we try to prepare our students for like the business and whatnot. And then as far as like students in school, certainly we have students that come in freshman year that already have representation. We have really clear conversations about how they need to talk to their representation about being in school, as far as like, these are the types of jobs that you might consider auditioning for. These are the types of jobs you are not going to.
Yep.
And, we sort of guide them there. Sometimes students will sign with people while they're in school. I always tell them to come and talk to me. They don't always, but many of them do, just so I can talk through, what it might mean. So we have students that go through Showcase that already have reps. And so Showcase is really focused on the casting directors, which
Uh-huh.
honestly is what I always tell my seniors that Showcase is focused on anyway, because even if you have an agent, it's those casting directors that determine if you get in the
You
room
get
or
extra
not. So
job.
like,
Yeah.
they're really the main goal of Showcase. Um, but then we have students who don't. They may work with an agent. They may decide to leave that agent. They may go through Showcase without an agent. What I will say though is that if we have a student that books a substantial opportunity and they are unrepresented, I will work to find them an agent.
Yeah.
So, for instance, the senior that I mentioned this spring that will be leaving school a couple weeks early, he's been developing a new show for the last couple of years, and he's one of the leads in the new show. It's going to do its out of town, trying to come into town probably in the next season or two. And so once that turned into not just the workshops, but it turned into the offer for out of town, I sort of facilitated some agent meetings there for him so that he could get a good team behind him, because that I do not want a student going into again, a 1 week development, not a big deal,
Right.
but I didn't want him going into something that had eyes for Broadway as a lead
Yep.
without someone to negotiate that contract and protect the student. And so that's an instance where, like, I do jump in and facilitate there. But
Yep. Though, of course, that's the much easier version. Once you have the big job, it's very easy for it to be like, "You want some commission on this thing?"
yeah,
Like, much
totally.
easier.
Well, we also, yeah, last year we had a senior who booked Heather's, right? Kate
Yeah.
Ostermeyer, he's doing Heather's off Broadway.
Yep.
And that happened before Showcase.
Yep.
And so he needed an agent, because I was like, I'm not letting you sign this contract until you get an agent. You gotta get you an agent. And so I again jumped the gun, facilitated some meetings for him, and he ended up signing literally between showcases. He got on the train and went down to the office and signed his contract with the agency, and came back up and did the second showcase, because I was like, I'm not letting you, these sort of bigger contracts where you're
Yep.
locked in a little more. I'm like, you need an agent. You need an
Yep.
agent to negotiate it for you,
Yep.
because you don't want to
Right.
get locked into
Every
something
year
where
of your
you're
life.
not protected in the ways you need to, and that's what the agent
Career
does.
ahead.
So
I
yeah.
love it. One thing we didn't talk about, just from we mentioned the academics outside of fans, but from a college experience, for those who don't know New York City super well, what is the experience of like Pace from a campus? From a like, what is my college experience going to feel like at Pace?
Yeah, I mean, I think students, I think people are like surprised at how like tight knit, small, close, connected it feels, because you just think, oh my gosh, New York City, and like, oh my gosh, urban campus, like most of the campuses in New York City, where you're like, wow, my campus is over like a 4 or 5 block span, and I have to like walk on the streets of New York to get to class. You think it's gonna feel like vast, and our community is really tight knit and really close, and so I think that students find it to feel smaller and more like welcoming, than I think it might look on the outside. We have lots of dorms on campus. Most freshmen live in dorms. Not all, those that are like maybe local or have family here will sometimes, you know, live with a family member because it's cheaper.
Yep.
But most live in dorms. And so you end up with just this wonderful community of folks that are living together, living on the same floor in the same building. And so, and that's, I think, pretty common, at most schools, you end up with just this like community of people that are sort of living on top of each other. But that happens here too. And so I think that, obviously I'm not a student in the program, so, I can't speak directly to that. But I do think that our students, I think we do feel close knit,
Yeah.
communal, welcoming. It does not, it doesn't feel like, at least we try, at least I hope. I don't know. I certainly can't speak for our students, but we try to feel open and available. Students are dropping by all the time. I'm scheduling meetings to like talk with students all the time. So like we're very, there and available to them. We're in conversation outside of class a lot. Um, so yeah, so I think it feels small and tight knit
Yep.
and not vast and overwhelming like you would think because it's New York.
Right. But certainly from a campus perspective, more of a city feel versus you're
Definitely.
not going to have a quad and a sprawling,
Well,
lots of
no, but
connected buildings.
we do have, One Pace Plaza is the main building, which is at the foot of the Brooklyn Bridge,
Yep.
and it is sort of like this big, like rectangle shaped building,
Yep.
and so there are like outdoor communal spaces outside,
Yep.
inside the building, and then of course we have our new building, which we haven't talked about, and I don't know if it's on your list, but more than
Go
happy
into it
to
now.
talk
It's
about
on the list
that
for sure. Yeah.
whenever you want to get there because that's a big one. But and we have, we have a new building, 15 Beekman, which has like just like beautiful facilities, beautiful communal areas. But yes, you are looking at an urban campus, so you are looking at, walking, down the streets of New York City to get to another building to go to
Yep.
class and then
Yep.
walking back, but it's all within a small area, right?
Yes.
So you're not really having to like commute around a lot unless you're taking a class that is taking you, you're going to a museum or something.
Yeah, it's more
But
just the experience of like it's not like everybody you walk around in the streets you're wearing a beautiful Pace sweatshirt. Not everyone will be wearing a Pace sweatshirt, and that you'll have normal human beings and just
yeah,
walking
you have
through,
normal
go to
movies
Starbucks,
around.
and
Yeah,
then
but you'll also like, because of like right there on like, William Street and Fulton, it's just like also a lot of pace. Sure. So you sort of feel like you're
talk to me about the new facility. So what do you
yeah.
want to hit in terms of your new
Totally.
facility?
So we have a new building and it will be open and live next fall. Um, so I say like knocking on everything. There's been no delays, but we're all like, surely it won't be there that fast. It's
Yeah,
been
yeah.
about 3 years. So we are building a brand new performing arts building, and it is going to be absolutely stunning and amazing and gorgeous. And it is going to be in One Pace Plaza. So again, that building I was talking about has a theater in that building called the Michael Schimmel Theater. It was not designed for theater, by the way. It was designed for like lectures and like things like that. So acoustically, it was always terrible, but that was always where we would do like, a few shows a year. Basically, right where that is, they tore that down. They kept the bones of the theater, but they have built, I believe it's 5 stories, performing arts complex. So in this building, we will now have 3 theaters. We will have a small theater, a medium theater, and a large theater, which is sort of the model we've always used. We've just been renting because they've been building the building. So we've been renting outside space except for the black box, which we have on campus. So we'll have 3 spaces. The small space and the medium space are flexible spaces, meaning we can do shows in the round, proscenium, thrust. We can move them around however we would like. The medium space is called the garden theater because the back wall opens up into one of the courtyards, so that we can have like, more immersive type stuff, which is particularly exciting, I think, for our BFA in theater making, which is a new program we have actually, that was formerly our BA in acting or BA in directing, has been sort of combined into a BFA in theater making with either an acting or a directing emphasis. They do a lot of devised work, so very cool there. And then we will have our large theater, which is, amazing. Again, it's sort of the bones of the theater that was there, but they've redesigned it so that it feels better for theater. So those 3 will be there. Tons of acting studios, dance studios, the largest costume shop in New York City
I
bigger
know.
than the Met by like a couple of feet.
Yeah, I would say you better be 2 inches bigger, right? Just
Yeah, it's
compete.
like literally like inches bigger, but it's the biggest room I've ever been in New York
Yeah.
City.
Wow.
All of our tech and design, we will keep our current building, 140 William, our performing arts building, the
Yeah.
PAB, as we love to call it, that will stay, but we will move all tech and design, will move over. So we will have all new amazing scene shops,
Yeah.
amazing costume shops. Our students will now, this is the thing we've never been able to do ever in the history of PACE. Our students will now be able to build sets in the spaces that they're
Uh-huh.
going to be. Right
Uh-huh.
now, they have to build everything to
Uh-huh.
tear down, to
Yeah.
travel to a theater to be put back up, right?
Well, that's
Now they're
great
going to be
training for
able,
like Broadway tours. That
I
is
mean,
how it
totally
works.
great.
Yeah.
Amazing. So much value in that, but
Yeah.
also very
Very
limiting when
nice
it
to not
comes
have to do
to
that.
what we
For
can
sure.
build. So our tech and design students, like it's going to be incredible. They're going to, amazing design studios, a new dance studios, new acting studios, more vocal studios, a new aerial studio for our aerial classes. It's just like, I mean, it's absolutely amazing. So we will be split between the two buildings. But yeah, a lot of stuff will stay there. But we right now we're having to rent a lot of other spaces, so this will reduce our rentals. We
The
will
rent.
still rent a little bit for dance between
Yeah.
empty and commercial dance. We still need a
Yeah.
little extra dance space,
It's
but
amazing. And I didn't say at the top with all of our wonderful connections, but we this summer got to tour our students who did the summer masterclass. We got to tour PACE as part of that experience. We're going to hold you to this August. Everything's open, brand new. You think?
allegedly, allegedly this
Allegedly,
summer
everything
we're
on
gonna
PACE, and
move in.
you get to see these gorgeous three
I know.
garden spaces, and oh, can't
I
wait.
know this semester I finally got to do a tour. I got to do like a hard hat tour of it. And literally JV and I were like,
Yeah. So
we were like, the whole time we were like, I don't know what to say. This is gonna
yeah.
be incredible.
Um, can we speak a little bit toward two quick hitters, and then we'll take a little break, and we'll talk a little bit more about admission here. But when last we checked in, were beginning the early decision idea at PACE,
Oh
right?
yeah,
So can we speak a little bit? That was kind of brand new. I think it was the year it was coming in
yeah.
last week. So basically, talking about not many musical theater programs have ED specifically, especially for BFA. What are the advantages, disadvantages in terms of which kind of students would you see are appropriate for the ED audition?
Yeah, I mean, I think any student where pace is like your number one, and like if you got in everywhere, pace would still be it and would be your number one, then like why not do early decision, right? The advantage is that you get to audition early. We know that like pace is your number one. There's never a question that's one of the things that I think is so hard about the recruitment process, right? Is that when it comes down to it, we sort of select all these students, and most of the time, like we have no idea if they actually even like our school,
Right.
right?
You
We
could be
know they liked
17
it enough
from
to
now.
audition, but for all we know, we're their like number 10 backup on a list of 10. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? So like,
Yeah.
but ED identifies pace is my number one. If I get in, I'm depositing immediately,
Yeah.
right? And so that's helpful. That's really helpful to know. So we've done it 3 years now. The
Yeah.
first year we didn't take anybody. We put a couple of people on the wait list, and we will often waitlist people from ED, right?
Yeah.
They will, so like even if you don't get in, you might get on the wait list, and then
Yeah.
again, we still know your ED, so we still know.
Right.
And just because you're on the wait list doesn't mean it won't turn into a yes
Right.
in March. It's just that it can't be an early decision. Yes, you go
Yeah.
sort of into the, wait list for now, but that could change, right? And so we've done it. So we accepted 2 students last year, and we accepted 1 student this year for early decision. So, we have started accepting folks
Yeah.
because it's newer, and like you said, it's not the thing that like so many musical theater programs are doing. It's usually a smaller applicant pool.
Yeah.
It doesn't change our like requirements,
Not
right?
changing
Or
your
sort of,
standards. Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
it doesn't change the standards there, but it just helps identify. And it's sort of like, I like this person. They're really good. We know they love us. Okay, why
Yeah.
not?
But even speaking toward, if anything, the standard may be a little bit higher for you to pull the trigger
Correct.
that early, even if you go, I think yes, but I do need to see everybody. You're really good. We like you. You're waitlist. I mean,
Exactly.
that's true with the ED, but there's like ED and then all the other different versions of auditioning from October through February
Yeah.
of whether we're willing to say yes now. I mean, it's
Totally.
complicated.
I mean, and that's exactly right. Where it's like it's helpful because it identifies it. So if you are like in our at the level of what we're looking for, like amazing. If
Yep.
you're like close but we're not sure, we'll totally waitlist you and
Yep.
keep you in the mix and keep you in the conversation, and you'll go sort of in the like temporary yes pile that we
Yep.
have, behind the
Right.
scenes, and then
Right.
as things go, we see where you end up. Because yeah, that's the thing, is it is so early in the process, and the applicant pool changes every year, which is why you can like pass your pre-screen one year and not pass it the
Yeah.
next year.
Ain't that the truth? Okay, let's to wrap this section. Let's talk a little bit about cost. So Jesse did a bit of this, but the tuition is about, it looks like 59,000, about 60,000 with just this tuition. We're not talking about housing and all those other things. Let's talk a little bit about how those scholarships work from, I know, pace from an academic perspective, you can get scholarships, and then also in terms of artistic, how that merit, how would those factors in to bring that number down?
Sure. So I will speak from what I know, but I will say that this year some things are sort of shifting and changing a bit on the financial aid landscape. Yeah, anyone listening, please go to the website and check things so that, if you're like, well, Amanda said on this podcast, we are
2
in the
years
middle of some
ago.
things changing. Yeah. And so
Yeah.
I just don't want to misspeak. But what I
Yeah.
will say is that pretty much no student pays full price. So even though that is the price,
Yeah.
PACE is relatively generous in scholarships for most students that get accepted.
Yeah.
Most of the scholarships you can receive from the university are academic in nature, right?
Yeah.
We don't have tons of, scholarships that we get to give out on our end that are based
Yeah.
on just like skill. So
Yeah.
most of the money you're going to receive is going to be academically from the university. The Honors College has some scholarship attached to it. That is one of the things that I think is starting to shift a bit as far as how much that is. So I can't say how much that is. But academically is really where you're going to get some money. Because things are sort of shifting a little bit, this year will be the first year that we will be able to give out one full ride. So this will be our first year that we can identify a musical theater student that we accept, that we can offer a full ride, complete full ride to. We've never been able to do that before, so that's really exciting. And it can be anybody. There's no criteria. It's who we
Uh-huh.
pick. So
Based on
that is
talent,
where we
based on
will be.
artistic. Yeah.
Yeah, we will be able to say, this is our top applicant. This is the person that we are like, we want no matter what, and we can identify that and offer them a full ride, which is really exciting. So
Yeah.
hopefully that will stick around for a bit.
Yeah.
The other thing PACE has is endowed scholarships. Those are scholarships so that you can't apply for until you're a student. So
Mhm.
typically you have to get through a semester or a year, and then you're able to start applying for those.
Yeah.
And those are scholarships that again, they're just endowed scholarships. They're endowed funds, and they have certain requirements based on what they are, but there's a lot of them. And so there may be, there'll be some that might be based on particular identity markers,
Yeah.
or financial needs, or particular schools, for SANS or for, the College of Health Professions or whatever school it might be. Sometimes those, it's sort of like every year you have to sort of check the website that we have that has all the endowed scholarships, because sometimes it's a scholarship that supports one person for 4 years. So it's not available to apply for until that person is graduating, right? So we have a lot of those, like they're not guaranteed, but a lot of students are able to really supplement and get some support there through some of the endowed scholarships. They just won't be available to you when you start. It's not until you're in and you're a student. But we have a student, Jovan, who graduated a few years back, who had his entire 4 years paid for through scholarships, because he figured out how to apply for every scholarship he could along the way and didn't pay a penny for school because of it. And so like that, he is always like, you send me people that need help. I can tell people how to do it. I can tell them how to figure it out, because he's like, I had to figure it out because I wasn't going to be able to stay if I didn't get as much as I could get, and I didn't pay a penny.
Well, let's give his contact information. He'll get
I know,
thousands of listeners
I know you
who
need to bring him on the
I'm
podcast
just
and be like,
saying, exactly. How do you
how
do that?
you tell
Exactly. All right. Well, let's take a short little break, and on the back end, we'll talk a little bit about the admission process.
it? Okay,
So
great.
we're not going to flash.
Sounds good.
All right, we are back with the wonderful Amanda Flynn. We got some nice childhood interruptions, or child interruptions, I should say, there on our break. But here we go. We're going to talk about the admission and the audition process for PACE a little bit. I'd love to start. I want to hear holistically, kind of what makes a great audition for you. But then I also want to dive a little bit into like what you're listening for in the voice. So maybe we can hit those two things, especially as the vocal expert. And I want to get into some of your vocal expertise. So first, like kind of what PACE is looking for, what you're looking for as a whole school, and then I really want to dive into like what you're listening for in the voice.
Sure. It's funny. I was just having this conversation yesterday with both JV and El Morgan because we were sitting in, auditions because this weekend that we just had was really kind of our first real weekend. We did early decision and we had like one day in December.
Kicking off the prime season here in January.
Yeah, but now we're like just in like it. We're in like the season now, and this was El Morgan's first time sitting in on auditions, and so we were having actually a lot of wonderful conversations about like, what we're drawn to and what we're looking for and what it is that we like, and it was really wonderful to have these conversations because when I started doing recruitment, I feel like I was just sort of thrown in, and it took me a while to kind of figure it out and sort of figure out what parts of my brain I needed to use because it is its own unique specific process that is not necessarily like a different audition process, if that
It's
makes
different
sense.
than teaching too, right? Because as a teacher, you go, I can help everyone. I see. I
Exactly.
want everyone. I want to
That's
help them all. Of course.
totally.
Yeah.
And that was sort of the big conversation that we were having is sort of like, I was like, if we take these like 30 kids that just came in this morning session, like we could work with every single one of them.
Yeah.
Every single one of them would benefit from what we offer here. If I was in a master class, I know exactly what notes and what direction I'm taking every single one of them, right?
Yeah.
But that's the part of your brain you kind of have to like quiet a little bit. It's not like you turn your educator brain off completely, but it has to sort of quiet a little bit. I think what makes a good audition for me is when people come in and they kind of know who they are,
Yeah.
right? There's good energy, there's no pretense.
Yeah.
There's no like trying to be something they're not or trying to impress.
Yeah.
They've chosen material that fits them, whether that's vocally, age wise, which doesn't mean that you can't sing something for an older character if it really still fits, right? Like, that's not like I have no hard and fast rules when it comes to auditioning, by the way. But like, generally it feels like, oh, I get why you're connected to that. Oh, I get why you're doing this. Oh, I'm learning something about you because you're doing this, right? And it matches your skill sets. And that it's really balanced, right? Like if you're going to come in and sing two songs, I really want to hear slightly different colors.
Mm-hmm.
And I really want to see different dramatic sides.
Yeah.
The goal is not to impress anybody ever. And I think that a lot of people get in that trap of like, I'm going to do the most dramatic song. It's going to be so dramatic and, and it's sort of like,
But you're
and
saying you really want to see contrast. You want to see two different people,
yeah.
or two sides of yourself as much
I
as
mean, the
possible.
amount of times on pre-screens this year that like because JV and I watched the pre-screens that, we were sort of commenting like, where's the joy?
Yeah.
So everything is so heavy and dark.
Yeah.
Even songs that like are not meant to be heavy and dark, again, because people want to show that they really can act and that they really, and it's sort of, they get drawn into that. And again, it's a trap. Come in, be delightful, show me your skill set and things that feel good for you, who you are. Make choices, have a point of view, be fighting for something in your material, have a drive, have it be very active and not victim-y. Those are the things that I think that I'm really drawn to. Yeah.
I love the phrase "be delightful." I haven't heard that before, but or sorry, I use the word joy a lot, but I love that. Be delightful. It's a great. It's a great.
Yeah, and that doesn't mean everything has to be like happy. Like, give me something dramatic in there. I love that. What a great contrast. But then don't turn around and sing cockeyed optimists
Yeah.
like this.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's sort of like
Yeah.
you're the saddest looking optimist I've ever seen, right?
It's the stakes, the sort of trap of, people have heard the idea of like the stakes need to be life or death, which I'm like, that's absolutely true. We need high stakes, but not everything can feel like it's a funeral. Not
Totally.
everything can feel like it's literally death.
Yeah, and here's my this is my example that I use when we talk about that of how like, life or death, it needs to be big, it needs to be active, it needs to be something. Yeah, it does. It needs to be like the thing that's like the most important in that moment. And the example I always use is like after I get my nails done, the
Mhm.
most important thing in the world in that moment is not messing them up. That
Yes.
is not life or
Stakes
death.
of that. Yeah,
But
yeah,
it
yeah.
means that I am like grabbing my water like this
No,
and
you're
like, you know what I mean?
committed to it.
It
Yeah,
is
yeah.
impacting everything I'm doing for the next 10 minutes because I
Yeah,
don't want to mess my nails up, right? I'm grabbing my phone, I'm trying, you know what I mean?
yeah,
And
yeah.
so it's like that's my example there of like in that moment, that's the most important thing in the world. It is not curing cancer. It is not
Yeah. Well,
that
your
deep,
nails.
but
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
really important, and my commitment to it in that time is huge. And so it's like when it comes to like the drive and the commitment, it has to just be something that's really important to you in that moment. It
Yeah.
doesn't have to be deep. It just has to matter and impact you.
Yeah, I love that first half of the answer, and then, but then, so I'd love to hear from both from you mentioned the pre-screens, and then especially the auditions. As somebody who's an expert in voice, and as somebody who, again, you hear almost any voice, and you go, "I know how to help you. I know how to work with you." What are you listening for in the voice in terms of, are you looking for ability? Are you looking for physical ability? Are you looking for musicianship? When you're listening to young voices, what makes you think I want that person at pace, and maybe I don't want this person at pace?
Well, I will say that I think it's very very rarely is it ever that we are like I'm adamant about this person because of only one sort of skill.
Right.
It's almost always cohesive, right?
Uh-huh.
I say almost always because every once in a while there'll be someone that you'll be like, I have to have this voice.
Right.
We have
Yeah.
to have this person here. This is the best voice I've ever heard in my life,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But most of the time, we're talking about holistic artists and holistic storytellers, and the voice is part of that. Okay.
Yeah.
But what I will say is that, um, well, I say that because that I think leads really is more of my perspective in recruitment than necessarily just listening to the singing. I'm
Yeah.
obviously listening to the singing.
Yeah.
We're listening to tuning. That is your sort of like baseline. And I would say that tuning and being able to sort of be in tune
Mhm.
is um kind of the biggest deal of them all.
Yeah.
um
And if you
and,
don't hear that ability, that might be a reason
yeah,
for
that's a difficult thing, and I'm not talking about the one tiny note that was wrong. I'm
right.
talking about consistent tuning
Yeah.
problems, right? That becomes tricky. That it will get better with training for sure, but does it match the sort of like baseline skill set of our students? It might not. Then I'm listening for. I really love to hear contrast, which doesn't mean I need a golden age soprano song and then a contemporary belt song. If you don't sing legit, please don't come in and sing. You don't have to come sing legit for me if that's really not where you'll learn how to
Show me
do that
what
in
you don't do.
school.
Yeah.
Do what you know how to do, but do not sing two songs that do the same thing vocally. Because and that doesn't mean they both can't belt, but I just want to hear different colors. I like to hear levels and nuance. I want to hear that you are able to have some vocal choices in there in your cut. You're doing some different things vocally. You're showing me a little bit of vocal control. I want at least a moment of something that sustains a little bit so that I can, hear you hold out a note versus, moving quickly. So there's certain things that I'm sort of looking for. I'm listening to the timbre and the tone, but really for me it's about the ability to show me a lot.
And how
Now
much are
don't
you looking for that in that first, "Hey, show me these 2 songs," versus how much or how often are you gonna say, "Ooh, can I see something else, or can we try that again, but I want to hear" how does that work in terms of working with you in those callbacks?
Yeah, so in our actual audition process, most of the time we only hear 2 songs,
Yeah.
right? We will sometimes ask for a mono we might wanna hear a monologue, we might ask if there's another song, we might give you an adjustment, but, sort of most of the time these days, we really get, like, most of it.
From what they bring.
We really get most of it, in those two songs. But
Yep.
you are correct. If there's a vocal quality I'm not hearing or I'm really curious about, I will ask what else they might have in their book. I'll say, hey, what else do you have? Or, do you have a pop song? Or do you have something that has more line to it, where you're holding notes longer or it goes a little slower, right? So I certainly will ask for that when I'm really not hearing something that I'm curious about. I certainly will ask there. But yeah, again, it goes back to the idea of like don't try to be impressive, really. People are like trying to like be as loud as they can. It's just, it's
But it's helpful even just to hear as a baseline that most people are doing those two. So in terms of the choice of what they're bringing in, that you would love for them to show you that contrast in the two and not wait for you to
totally.
ask for the
Totally, especially because, like, we give you the liberty to sing whatever you want. Like we tell people, "We don't care what you
two
want. Sing
songs per
whatever you
minute.
want." Sing what you want to show me that you
Yep.
feel like represents like you and represents your skill set right now. Um, uh, I want to hear contrast.
Yep.
Whatever that might mean, and sometimes I, I worry that it's like too open, and that people don't know what to pick. But, if you feel like you are going through the audition process and you have your two songs and those are the ones you're using, like use those for us. That's
Yep.
great. I have no problem hearing Golden Age soprano.
Totally.
Please. Love it.
No, but
I
there's
just don't
sometimes
look
our
at the
students will say
wiring.
things like, "Well, I'll do these 2, and then if they ask me for the third, I've got my really good one in the backup." And I
Like,
go,
I'm like,
"Oh,
sing your really good one
do
first for
that one
us at least.
first."
Do
Yes,
whatever you want.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, come in and start with the thing that you like love the most,
Yeah, yeah.
that you feel like really shows you off, and then pick something that you feel like contrasts with it,
Yeah.
right? Yeah,
Uh,
because like we just might not have time to sing
really quick.
another song,
Yeah.
especially if we aren't really seeing the things that we're, as interested in.
Yep.
And oftentimes after two songs, we're already like, oh my God, we love that person so much. Bye,
Yep.
enjoy the rest of your day. Like, I don't need to see anymore. Go enjoy
It's
New York City.
unbelievable to I think for the students and parents to go, "I spent 18 months on this process," and to go, "You got it all in 8 minutes." I mean, it just seems like impossible, but it's like, yeah, like really can
It
happen,
really
and that
does,
is
it really does. Because yeah, because like, it's like it's like it's sort of like, the auditions kinda go, like, one of 3 ways. It's sort of like pretty quick, you're like, "Oh my god, I love this person."
Yep.
And so you're sorta like, "Just entertain me for the next 3 minutes," you know?
Yep.
Or it's sort of like, I don't think this person is really what we're looking for, it's just not quite matching our student body."
Yep.
And then there's the in the between where we're sorta like, "Huh, I'm
Mhm.
kind of interested, but I
Mhm.
think I need to hear this or that," or I'm curious if their acting might feel more specific on text versus song.
Uh-huh.
Let's hear some of the monologue, right? And so,
Uh-huh.
sometimes trying to figure that out in there a little bit, right?
Yep.
And so it's sorta like, you just never know. Or sometimes we might think someone is amazing and then still wanna hear a little bit of their monologue because
Yeah.
they're so good, so it's just again,
I'm glad you said that third one because otherwise they were gonna be like, "That means I'm in the third
that
category."
exactly. No, but it's true
They're
because
all gonna try to
sometimes
figure it out. Yeah.
yeah, but it's sometimes it's sort of like, "Oh my god, we love them so much. I wonder," and we just wanna hear more or we wanna spend more time with them or you know what I mean? Like
Yep.
it can there's no rhyme or reason to it. I always tell people, it's a very human process. This whole thing is such a human process, and as much as we want it to be black and white and a checklist,
Yeah.
it's a human process.
Ain't that the truth? Do you mind giving as we talked a little bit about the timing audition, do you mind giving a little bit of numbers in terms of do you have a sense of like how many students apply and then how many pre-screens get turned into callbacks, get turned
Sure.
into the 32 spots? So what do those little cut downs look like?
Yeah, I mean, it can change from year to year, but I would say as far as pre-screens go, we typically have around like 2,000. That's
Yep.
probably
Yep.
you
And
know,
2000 leads to how many live auditions?
between about 7 and 900. We never turn away people we wanna see.
So
We
that's
will
like
add days if we
48%
have
are
to.
gonna pass.
Yeah, we will
You'll add
add
dates.
days.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, so, like, if you get that if pre-screen ends now, you might be like, "I have to do it in Chicago," and it's like, "Chicago's full, I'm sorry." But, like, we won't be like, "Oh, sorry, we filled our auditions." We'll just we always keep, like, TBD days on
Yep.
our calendar, and we add them
Yep.
if we need to. And we
Yep.
still offer virtual auditions, so, like, people can audition on Zoom if they need to, particularly if they, can't get into one of the other places, but, that's about what that is, and then it's a class of 32.
Yep, I love it. It's a great numbers and I mean, sounds daunting because it is daunting, but
It is
also
not
not quite as bad
a
as
lot
it
of time.
seems.
you
Yeah.
know?
It's a lot. Okay, we'll skip some of the academic stuff in terms of the academic admission because I think some of that will be really similar from Jess's interview, so we can
I
jump
think so.
past
I
that.
don't think academic admissions have changed much. I always just tell people just know those deadlines because the academic deadline is
Yeah.
before our pre-screen deadline, and
Yeah.
we can't
Um,
do anything.
I'd love to just do a little bit of, sort of bonus stuff from the MTCA time of like, in your experience with students and coaching them in this process. And again, maybe especially from a vocal perspective, like,
Yeah,
is there stuff that you think 15, 16, 17-year-olds should know now that you really not just have experience working, but now running programs?
yeah.
What is the stuff that you go, I wish my 16-year-old students had started doing this sooner, or wish they knew this is what I should be doing from a vocal perspective?
I mean, I think obviously, like, voice lessons are really helpful. They're valuable to sort of start that training, earlier than September your senior year.
Yeah,
Because it gives you time to build skill and coordination because singing is truly coordination, just like
right.
any other like motor skill.
Like any athletic
And
skill.
yeah, coordination takes time to like coordinate, right? And I think we sometimes think of singing as being like such so artistic and
Uh-huh.
so much about like who we are, and it certainly is that, but it is also like an actual physical motor control, and that takes time.
Yeah.
And so the earlier you can start that process, the better, and the more experience you can get, singing in your high school choir and your church choir and your, performances and musicals and things, just so that you are um, testing out your singing in multiple environments.
Mhm.
I think that's a really important part of like the learning process, right? We always say that skills are truly learned when they are repeatable in various locations under various environments,
Uh-huh.
right? So that's how you really know you've learned something, right?
Uh-huh.
You can sing consistently under the pressure of an audition and
Yep.
at home and in a lesson, right?
Yep.
There's consistency across environments, right?
Yep.
And that's a piece that I think is sometimes missing, right? Where it's like I do great in my lesson, but I walk in the room to audition and write, which is where like the mock auditions and stuff are so valuable, right? Because you get that practice of like, wow, I crashed and burned. Thank
Yep.
goodness it was a safe space for me to do that. I learned about what my process needs to be, right?
Yep.
And uh, so I think that some consistency in the training, and consistency of the like lifestyle,
Mhm.
that is promoting sustainable voice practice,
Yep.
um, hydration, rest,
Yep.
knowing when to rest your voice, identifying red flags in the voice, knowing when to say no, even if it means no to my senior year musical.
Uh-huh.
Because here's the deal, I don't care about your senior year musical
Yep.
one bit,
Yep.
right? I don't care. So like that doesn't matter to me. Like,
You care about those 8
beyond
minutes
like
in the room with them.
yeah, beyond like I want you to have fun your senior year. Like, how great, right? But like, I don't care. It's not going to make a difference in the application process, right?
Yep.
And so, like, learning that like sustainable vocal practice
Yep.
that allows you to be consistent, because it is really hard to go to Chicago in February and have to sing, and go to New York in January, and all these places that you're traveling to go and audition. You will be sick for at least one of them. So,
Yep.
like, can you sing your music sick?
Yep.
Right? What happens if you end up being like, "Oh no, I haven't gotten a chance to warm up." Like, do you know how to warm yourself up super fast if you don't have access to a practice
Mhm.
room at an audition, right? Like, just like all of these little things that I think kind of help lead to just better voice practice, so that people are able to feel like they have some semblance of control over their vocal health and their vocal sort of sustainability. Yeah, because it's just it's really really tough, and it like, I can tell when people are sick when they're auditioning. And I can also see the panic behind their eyes.
Yep.
And it's okay. It's going to be okay. But
Yep.
like it's going to happen. You're going to be sick for at least one of your auditions,
Yep.
if not multiple.
It's I'm so glad you went into that. I mean, I don't know in the order of release. I'm recording it tomorrow, an episode with Paul Kwok, who's a vocal health expert, right?
I
And
love
that like
Paul.
imagine you
That's
would know
someone I
him.
love.
Yeah, I will. But it's also, it's one of the things we often talk about is like vocal health is not just about, okay, what happens when you get sick and when you're injured. It's like, how do you build those sustainable habits for your whole journey of the year? It's not just
It's a
about,
lifestyle. Yeah,
yeah,
it's a lifestyle. It's not a day of
yeah,
precaution,
that's,
right? You cannot just be like, "Oh no," and then expect it's like you have to be, right? You have to be taken and like you will get sick.
yeah,
That is not your fault. That has
right,
nothing to do with how well you have taken care of your voice. You will catch a flu or a virus. Like it'll happen, right? Like we can only prevent so much, but much of what I think young people deal with, even our college students, because this is part of being in college, a lot of what I think students deal with in this process is not illness. It
right.
is like
Vocal mute.
preventable voice
Yeah,
fatigue,
yes,
and that's the stuff. And I said that a ton when I was an
yeah,
MTCA coach. I said it
yeah,
all the time.
yeah,
Like you have to like be consistent. You will be sick. Like, how can you sing this song when you're sick? If not, what do you have in your book that you could sing sick?
yeah,
So that if you had to pivot,
right. So
because again, the goal is not to impress.
right. I love it. Let's talk a little bit about and my last question before we move to wrap in is just about the Broadway vocal coaching. So
Yeah,
for I'd love to kind of hear a little bit of an understanding of what that is, like what you do for Broadway shows when you're working on Lightning Thief or when you're working on Operation Mincemeat, and for young people who think that sounds like a really cool career, kind of what that is and what your role and what that looks like.
sure. So my sort of like day-to-day job it's kind of been different on every show to a degree. Um, just in the sense of like what the needs of the show are, sort of what I'm being hired and paid to do. But generally, most of the time, in most of the shows that I have done, I see actors weekly.
Yeah,
Not that I see every actor weekly, but they're on a rotation. So I'm seeing everyone monthly or every 3 weeks or whatever, however it works out.
yeah,
But there's time in my week that is dedicated to seeing the actors in the show, and sort of first and foremost is working on the show, making sure the show feels good, hitting any parts of the show that feel difficult, that feel fatiguing, just working on general like vocal technique through for the show, like how are we singing the show, or speaking in the show. Sometimes that's part of it. With Mincemeat we do, we have actors that are playing different genders, and so we've done some gender work on the voice of how do
hmm,
we create a more masculine sound or a more
hmm,
feminine sound. And so, working on things for the show. And then as the show starts to feel good, shifting into more like cross training where it's a space to work other types of things so that, just like in PT, like let's say you're a dancer and you do all of your choreography to the right, your body
uh-huh,
gets very imbalanced, right? So you
uh-huh,
go to PT and they're like, wow, we need to give you these exercises to do on the left so that you stay balanced, right?
yeah,
And so it's sort of in that vein of like, hey, you're doing tons of high belting. Why don't let's work on something legit so that we're getting your larynx into a different position. We're making different shapes with the vocal tract. We're having different vocal fold closure. We're doing things different so that the voice stays more balanced.
yeah,
And then sort of the third piece is a vocal health resource throughout the run of the show. So I am sort of, the point person for the actors when they run into a vocal issue of some sort. Something is
yeah,
starting to feel fatiguing. I do a lot of like helping them navigate like just sort of general minor, season change, the
yeah,
sniffles, the colds, the allergies,
yeah,
getting them in with a laryngologist when it is beyond the sort of,
yeah,
typical, season change sniffles that we get, helping them, just facilitate getting seen with the doctor, being a little bit of a point person between the actor and the producers or the creative team as far as, communicating if there is something going on that is more serious with an actor and they're going to be out for a chunk of time. Um, but, generally speaking, I'm there to support the actors and I'm
yeah.
there to support them vocally through the run, whether that's technical issues, cross training, or just vocal health and sustainability support.
It's so cool.
So
So
that's what
cool
I
to
would
hear
say.
about all those different roles and so much like so much in the school to then professional world. It's like you start off in like a voice lesson is X and a class is Y, and then it sort of does often merge into like how does it all sound, and all these different things that you might be in charge of that
Yeah.
aren't exactly like what a voice lesson is.
Totally. So, I mean, and it can change and it certainly can look different, in a different environment, but generally speaking, that's kind of the gist of the work.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah, I love it. You've been so generous with your time, Amanda. The way we normally wrap this is just with advice to the parents. And now you, of course, a parent yourself, so though a much younger one, more like me with you have a 3-year-old. But let's talk about, for the parents of these students. We have many parent listeners who are
Yeah.
trying to guide their children through this process. What advice would you have to those parents in terms of how they can best support their kid through this daunting process?
Oh man, that's tough. I will say that every time we have, our in-person auditions or anything, I always give a huge thank you to the parents and, the entire like support system, whatever that might look like, the support system for these kids because it is a long difficult like process that takes time, energy,
Yeah,
heart, soul, money,
funny.
everything,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So I'm always like so grateful to these support systems, be it parents, be it teachers, grandparents, aunts,
Mhm.
uncles, friends, whoever it is that is supporting any young person through this because they can't do it without you. So I'm grateful. So if you are one of those people, thank you.
Yeah.
um, I think I would say one thing that's more like, mama bear, which is that like it's all going to be okay. It will all work out in the end. It really will. Um, Students will end up where they need to be, or they're going to learn what they need to learn through the process and try again the next year. And it will be okay, even if for moments it feels like it won't be. Um, and then I would say my like practical, like tangible advice is like, um, just stay on top of deadlines and requirements. Make your kid do it, but you better have access to that spreadsheet too. I mean, we just got this heartbreaking email like a week ago from a kid's mom who's like, this has been my kid's dream for forever. And somehow their application got routed to the wrong place.
Oh,
They clicked BFA art instead of
yeah.
musical theater
Uh-huh.
and then like didn't submit. So it just like didn't submit pre right. You know what I mean? So like, but it's like we can't do. There's nothing we can do about
That's
that,
sad.
right?
There's so
And
much
so
to
it's
lose
like,
in this process, but that is where you go if
yeah,
you
and so it's like, I want you to make your kids have to do it. Like, don't do it all for them. Make them have to research, make them have to have some drive.
yeah,
And also,
yeah,
double check everything yourself.
yeah,
Just because that happens sometimes. A kid, like, either just like doesn't, realize there was a deadline or they got it mixed up. And it's truly like, oh no, right?
right.
And so, like,
Deadline versus pre-screen deadline, those kind of
yes,
things. You go, "Oh, no."
exactly, and it's just like, we have no control over the university. We cannot let them they will not, you know we have a little control over the pre-screen. Like, if someone has it, like, every year there's, like, a handful that Wayne, our enrollment director, will let through because they were, like, in the process of submitting when it shut down or something,
Right.
right? And
Yeah,
so it's like he can see that in there, he'll push them through past the deadline, but, like, if you haven't like, we can't do it. So I would say, make them take some responsibility there. They need to do that because they are going to have to take care of themselves when they get to school. But don't hold their hand there. But like when they go to sleep, open up their
open up the
spreadsheet,
spreadsheet that you've been
double check everything, go
secretly
to
on.
all those websites.
Yeah,
Um, just because it's heartbreaking when real, honest to God mistakes happen and we can't do anything about it.
that's great
So.
advice. You already mentioned earlier with the financial aid stuff to head to the website to double check more information. If people want more information, generally, do you like the website? Do you like social media? Is there a place that you go, hey, I really like when people check out this platform?
Well, I think a couple things. I think we have tons of information on our website. The SANS website, our entire curriculum is laid out there. The curriculum map is laid out there as far as like what you take every semester. And it's even plugged in with like an ideal academic. If you came in with
Yep.
nothing, that
Yep.
can change, but like it is all laid out there on the website. You can get a lot of information on the SANS website, just about SANS in general and about the shows. And so I think those are really great resources. If you come to New York City, come and do a tour, even if you're a freshman, sophomore, junior. If you're going to come to New York for vacation or something, come and take a tour. Why not? It'll give you a sense of the school. But we
Yeah.
also have a student-run Instagram page. The Pace Musical Theater on Instagram is run by students, and so that's a great way to sort of see what alumni are up to see what shows we're doing, programming. We have student takeovers, all sorts of stuff there. So that's a really great way to sort of get the like student connected side, right, from the student's perspective. That can be really really helpful there. And then if you see one of our students on Instagram, send them a message
Yep.
that you're interested in pace and you have a question. Don't send them 10 questions, but like send them, be like, I'm just curious, like what's your favorite thing about whatever, the curriculum, or favorite thing about being in New York, whatever one question you might. Our students are really generous. They really are generous, and I guarantee you they will get back to you and connect with you there. They're
With the
so eager to talk about the program, and they're the best way to learn about it. They can talk about it in ways that I never will be able to.
with the exception of that one student who we're going to have to bleep out their name because they're about to get 1,000 questions of how to go to school for free. They're about to get 1,000 Instagram DMs.
Well, notice I didn't give a last name. I didn't give a last
Exactly. Very
name, by
smart.
the
Very
way.
smart. Amanda, this was so fun to get to reconnect. And thank you so much for the time today. I really, really
Thank you
appreciate
so much. I really appreciate it.
it. Yes, yes, yes. Oh boy, she is smart and articulate. Am I right? And I honestly mean this as like the greatest compliment. It's just an odd thing to tell someone that this is the greatest compliment about themselves, but she reminds me a lot of me in many ways, especially like verbally. She's got that like ability to hold a lot of complicated information and like disseminate it quickly without necessarily actually rambling. And as someone who I think I do that pretty well, I really appreciate that in others. It does, I will say, it takes a bit of work as a listener. I know, and certainly because I make other people do this when I talk, that you have to like be able to take it all in when it's delivered quickly, and especially in long form, especially if there's a bit of a weave in it. And it can be pretty condensed. I think a lot of people who talk as quickly and as much as we do, I'm going to say me and Amanda, might repeat themselves a lot, but often we don't. I've noticed she doesn't, and I don't do that. And so it can make it a little trickier for you. If you're someone who was listening to this episode, while you were doing a difficult chore or while you were on the treadmill, maybe this is one that you should listen to while driving or washing dishes or something that's pretty mindless, so you can really focus on all that quick content. Let me know if you were on a treadmill during this episode and you didn't catch it all. You can put that in the rating review or leave it in a comment or whatever. By the way, I do enjoy thinking and hearing about all the different places that you all listen to these podcasts. It's really fun when you share with me. I always listen in the morning on dog walks, or I listen right before I fall asleep at night, or whatever it is. A lot of you will say in the car or traveling in some way. There's something so intimate about the first thing in the morning or right at the end of the night. But all of it, I'm here for it. I love it. I'm glad to be part of this intimate parasocial relationship with all of you. Okay, let's dive into some takeaways. I know this has been a long episode already, and I've got a lot of takeaways because there's a lot of episode. What are we going to do? The first one was just, I'm really glad we got to have that conversation about working in school. We did a bit of it in the Jesse episode too, but I thought this was a really nuanced and good version of that conversation. And, I think you can hear that Pace, and many of you would know this already, is really unique and has just a different tenor than other schools do in the way they approach it. Not that they're wholly different, but that it is a distinct and different approach often, right? But then also Amanda gave you some of the limits of what we mean when we say working in school. That doesn't mean that it's just like completely willy-nilly, and at least understanding their philosophy and their educational approach behind it as well. Because when you hear it in rumor form, or the way people talk about Pace, sometimes they go a little too far. They don't quite encapsulate it, I think, as well as Amanda did. And it is definitely different than other schools, and I'll say than most schools that are really going to actively discourage work while you're in school. Again, not that other schools wouldn't allow you to take a semester off or take a year off if you did book something, but they're not going to encourage and actively help you the way that Amanda was talking about. And then it's also, on the other end, this is also different than a school like you heard in Norwalk's episode, where they would actively encourage you, like, yeah, the whole point is get you working. I don't care about your degree, get you working. Let's get you out there, right? Whereas Amanda does talk about, hey, I'm trying to help you graduate, trying to help you work and also help you graduate. So just a slightly different order of priorities. And I thought that was encapsulated pretty well in the conversation. Not really a lot I need to add in the takeaway, but kind of this is a unique version of it in the landscape. So anytime we have that, I want to make sure we zero in on what is actually unique, since so many of these schools, really, a lot of the programs have a lot of similarities. I also did just want to quickly touch. We talked in the episode a bit on that conversation about city campuses, and I feel like maybe it's the way I phrased it, but Amanda was really trying to emphasize the idea that, like, hey, we do have a campus, which of course I understand it. It is true. Like there are some schools that have literally zero campus. Like maybe everybody lives within one building, or it's even a floor of a building if it's a really small school, and that's not the case with Pace. I mean, they do have buildings and the feeling of a campus, but I do think for people who aren't from New York, the idea of what a city campus is when it's New York can really have a different feeling than what you might be picturing, right? This isn't something that's so unique to Pace necessarily, as it's really a New York schools thing in general. When you're talking about NYU or Marymount or any of the other New York City schools as well, I will say some of the uptown schools can feel a bit more campusy when you talk about a school like Columbia, right? But still, a bit more is what we're talking about, not only slightly more campusy and certainly different than some of these other cities, right? But when you talk about those downtown schools, right, which Pace and NYU, there's both schools that are really downtown, the difference between a city campus when you talk about New York versus Pittsburgh or Boston or whatever kind of beautiful city campus you might be picturing from images of the social network or whatever it is that you have in your mind of like what a college city campus is. It's a significant difference when you talk about New York, right? With all of these, you're still in a city and the city is your campus, right? When you're talking about a city school as opposed to a rural or a suburban school or even like a big state school, that kind of thing. But with some of these cities, there really is a pocket that is basically all Carnegie Mellon students. And this pocket of Pittsburgh, Oakland, which is like kind of a part of Pittsburgh, but it's like Pitt and CMU take over all of Oakland, and there really are campuses. There's a quad. There's a lot of buildings all together. It's sort of encapsulated, and you feel like you're at Carnegie Mellon, right? Which is certainly the image I have of like Harvard, though I haven't toured Harvard. But that same thing we talk about like some of these Boston schools where you go, there really is a quad and a feeling of I'm in the city and the city's around me, but really I'm on this campus, and most of what I'm going to experience in this small pocket of what I am is going to be my school. When you talk about Pace in New York City, I mean in NYU, that is. There definitely is a pocket that is very Pace flavored and NYU flavored, but it is really within the hustle and bustle of the city itself, right? We're talking about there are individual buildings that are going to be Pace specific, but it's not going to have what you might expect a quote unquote campus feel to be like, right? And all of that, probably many of you listeners who experience, that's completely obvious to you, but we do see it every year. So I want to make sure I remark on it because every year, and I just heard it this weekend with a couple of people who went down to Pace for the first time. Maybe they hadn't come to our summer program and gotten to tour it yet. And they were like, oh my gosh, I kind of wasn't, it wasn't what I expected from a quote unquote city campus and what was in their head. Okay, let's also hit that topic of early decision and Amanda giving you those wonderful specific numbers. I really appreciated that. She said in their first 3 years, which it had just launched when we talked about it last with Jesse, the first year they took 0 students. The second year they took 2 students. And then this year, the third year, they took 1 student. I think those numbers are so helpful to hear. I'm really going to push more and more to get as many numbers as it's still a little bold because they don't always want to share them with you. But anytime I can get numbers for you, I'm going to try to get numbers because I think it's really helpful for you just to get a sense of like, what are we actually talking about? So there's some tangibleness to it. But I just thought like Amanda talked with beautiful honesty, transparency about like, why it is good for Pace, especially, right? That idea of it's really nice for them to definitely know they can have you if they want you. But also in that, she did outline why it might not be good for you, right? Now, if you are a definite yes for Pace and they are definitely your number one, which again, through the process could change, but even let's just say for now, they're number one, they're your number one, and that won't change. I will say there is some convenience, certainly, in that if you do Pace first, you might not have to do as many other auditions because you've been done early, so you don't have to schedule and finish all of your auditions the way that you would normally, and you might have to do a lot of auditions. Though, again, it's worth saying, with the timing of how the process works in 2026, you are still going to be doing all of your pre-screens and all of your applications. So it's actually only saving you the fun part, which is the auditions. Everybody likes this part of it where you're like doing the auditions, but it just saves you money and travel and all that stuff. But if you still have to do all the apps and all the pre-screens, you're still doing a pretty full process and then just cutting off basically the fun part. But again, the travel. So there's not nothing in that of what you could save. But the most important thing I think is, which many of you probably noted, and you maybe can just intuit this when you hear 0, 2, and 1, right? Is I love that she was honest and clear that it does not increase your chances artistically, right? The way she put it is, we aren't lowering our standards. They're not lowering their artistic standards for the audition. In fact, she even said it might be a little hard, a higher standard, which is, we know to be true that that is true for most early auditions, that it's actually a little higher for them to commit that early if they're going to commit on their end, right? And you also have to add in, which we always talk about, when you add into the math of what are my percentage chances, it is likely decreasing even a little bit more than that, because if their standards aren't lowering at all, let's say they didn't raise them, but they had the exact same standards, right? But if their standards aren't lowering at all, but you yourself in your audition performance are likely not showing as high a quality of your talent in an early audition, even if it's not your first audition, if it's your second audition, your third audition, and you set it up very consciously and smartly by giving yourself some practice and a mock. Amanda mentions, the wonderful idea of getting to flame out in a mock before you get your first couple auditions. But even if it's your second or third audition, we see time and time again, you will likely be much stronger with your auditioning later in the process than you are going to be at the very beginning. As this episode releases in late January, we just see it again and again, as we see it every year, our students getting more and more confident and talking about, man, I'm really starting to get it. I'm able to do stuff that I couldn't do in November. I couldn't do in October, right? You get better by doing this process. Of course you do. That's true of almost anything in life, and certainly for what is a difficult and complicated process. So I really wouldn't take that as a revelation, anything specific to PACE. In fact, the reason I'm pulling it out of the takeaway is to say, this is not Amanda sharing something that is unique to PACE. In fact, she is just being honest and transparent and sharing what is generally true for the process when we talk about early decision, or generally early auditions in general. So please do extrapolate this, not just to a learning about PACE and early auditions, but just really the idea of early auditions and early auditions in general, right? So we appreciate that Amanda was honest and transparent. And I think a general rule to sort of pull from. The thing I don't want you to hear is that we don't like early auditions. Certainly at MTCA, we are a big fan of you doing early auditions. It is great to spread out your year and get that practice. And some school has to go first, right? You can't do all your auditions. They can't all be your middle of your audition tour. You got to do something first so that you can get better. But when you're talking about maximizing your admissions chances, and when you're talking about your favorite schools, especially schools that are as competitive as PACE, which is a very competitive school, you are generally better off auditioning in the prime season of January and February. That's where we have seen the numbers again and again to see, when we look at these most competitive schools and where their admissions happen, that it's going to be in that prime season across the board. Again, there's always exceptions and there's all the different things you should factor in for yourself, but that's the advice which most of you are worried about, maximizing your chances of getting in as the thing that you're trying to prioritize. And so that's the advice there. I will say, this is kind of a side note to the early decision idea. I do think the idea was sprouted, and Jesse talks about it on the podcast. Like many things, it was sprouted as an idea to try to increase equity, knowing how hard this process is and hearing about, oh my gosh, people are applying to how many schools? That sounds so crazy, right? So for the right kind of student, for a student who is so phenomenally talented that admission is not going to be an issue either way, which those students could exist, and for those students who are so unique and diverse and offer something that very few other students would offer, and that PACE or any school just knows, I'm definitely going to want this student no matter what, there is potentially a reason why you do this. You are saving yourself some of the fullness of the audition process. Again, we talked about you're not saving all the process, but you're saving some of the process, right? But I do think, the unintended consequence of many of these, sort of equity focused measures is the opposite effect can almost happen. Sometimes it can actually cause the opposite of what the intended effect is. The same is true. I always use the example of like schools that will have you learn a specific dance, which is something also that Jesse was playing with at the time. This idea of like, if we have a specific dance that's just for our school, then we'll save you, because it seems ridiculous. You shouldn't have to have someone film your pre-screened dance and help you choreograph that. We just want to see you dance. So we'll give you the dance that you need, right? But given the sort of way that all the schools work, what they actually do is make you learn an additional dance because you're still going to have to learn the dance that you need for every other school. And now you have an additional dance if you want pace that you have to add. The same is true for you have to learn a specific monologue off a list. Sometimes they'll give these kind of very simple lists of pretty overdone pieces, but they're saying, we don't need you to go get creative and find a monologue in a library. That's there's a nice intention behind that. They're saying, just use one of these 8 monologues, then we're all at the same page. It's like a school uniform. Everybody's on the same page. They think they're helping by providing you this, but actually what they're doing is making you learn another monologue because you're not going to likely use one of those monologues for your other schools, right? And again, the sort of example of this, so it's not exactly a parallel, but in this case is that you are still going to have to do all of the hard parts of your audition process because of the way the timing of this works, that you're not going to find out your result that you're into pace before you're going to want to do your pre-screens and your applications for the other schools. So it doesn't quite have the effect that the faculty are intending. It doesn't actually mean that you won't have to still apply to 16, 18, 20 schools or whatever that number is that you might do. You're just going to apply and then have pace first, and then likely still have to go through this whole process, including what Amanda said, where if you're waitlisted and it could still happen for you, great, but it's not actually saving you the time and the money and all those things that they're trying to do. I've had this conversation so many times over the years, but I had it a few times in the MTCA green room just this weekend of just like, how nice would it be for all of you, I know, as listeners, if someone from the outside could just be the czar of college auditions, who are going to help take this over, make this all make sense from the family perspective, right? Because again, the vast majority of these faculties and programs, I think, really have the right intentions. They're trying to do what will be as easy for you as possible, and they're trying to help for the most part. I think that is what you're seeing, and certainly you're seeing that in what Jesse was trying to do there. I just think they see it through the lens of their process and not with the bird's eye view of the entire process of what families are going through as a whole, right? There's nobody whose job it is to like get all the schools in a room and guide them from a family's perspective of what must it be like to apply to 16 of these schools, right? I will say Caitlin Hopkins really tried to do it a few years back in introducing the common pre-screen and had some success. But I think ultimately it was a pretty minimal positive effect in what it actually did in terms of changes to the process, because unless you can get all of the programs to truly be on the same page, which is really hard, of course, to get all these artists with all their opinions, unless you're going to really get them all on the same page, you're not going to alleviate big parts of the process. What the common pre-screen did was effectively turn you from having to process the 3 different options, or what effectively the 3 different options, by listing them down as 3 different options. It did help a little bit, but then of course not every school takes the common pre-screen, so it only helped a little bit, right? If every school would do that, it would be a little bit more of a help, right? And, of course, as you do that, it's also, there's program heads changing every year. It's ever shifting landscape. And the more schools that get on the same page, the more that other schools will see an opportunity to be that unique school and kind of use whatever tactic they can to try to differentiate themselves. We're not common. We're the school that wants something else, right? And it just means there isn't an easy solution, sadly. It's not like, it seems like it would be so obvious. Couldn't you just do it this way? It's not actually obvious of how that would happen or how someone could actually make that happen. Okay, that was a long, rambly one. Let's do a few quick hitters here. Really love that talk about the endowed scholarships. And you're all going to go message Jovan after this podcast. Our wonderful college advisor, Amy Breslow, she did a deep dive on this at Pittsburgh Unified. We talked a lot in our financial aid talk. And I thought it was really great. This can really vary from school to school. But just this idea, what I can kind of highlight and throw out here now is the possibility of those scholarships that do exist once you're in school, which of course Amanda talked about. And you won't be able to rely on them going in. So that's only so helpful in terms of you making a plan. But just that idea that if you're willing to do that work and apply to more scholarships and potentially more essays and all the different things you might have to do, that it can be a really significant boost, as Amanda mentioned with Jovan, to the student themselves in terms of what they can do to bring down their cost year to year, right? And I wanted to do a little highlight of it, even though I'm not going to add a ton more beyond what Amanda said, just because we haven't talked about them a lot on the pod. Maybe we actually will have Jovan or somebody else on, or maybe we'll have just some more conversation, a deeper dive on this in a future episode. I also loved just the phrase, and I said it, so I'm just underlining again in the pod, that idea of be delightful, just a different phrasing of how we talk about bringing joy into the room and what that means when you talk about both joy or being delightful in dramatic work and then also in that comedic or lighter work, whatever you're contrasting it with. But I just really like that phrase, right? Be your delightful version of yourself. I almost said something very similar to that a couple episodes back when we talked about the psychological work that we talk about this time of year of what it is to bring in your best self, right? How do I bring in the version of myself that shines and delights? How do I bring the shiny, delightful version of Charlie in as opposed to the other version, right? That's so often what I mean when I say bring joy into the room, bringing my joy, my delightfulness in the room. But be delightful. I just like that as a phrase. I love her answer. I thought she just put it so cogently. And again, I think she's really intelligent. I like the sort of way she talks, but we talk about the cohesive combination of skills and personality and what they're looking for. Just to say, again, same way we talked about early decision, this is the sort of rule and not the exception, that most of the time it is the case when they look at, hey, how am I accepting a student? Is it about talent and skills, or is it more about personality and who they are? Of course, there can be exceptions where it is mostly one or the other, and some schools talked about that in terms of the different ways that they make the exception. But it's almost a universal answer, and it's the reason, honestly, that I stopped asking that question. If you go back and listen to early versions of the pod, I used to say, "Hey, what percentage would you say is skills versus what percentage is the human being?" I actually loved hearing all the answers they gave. I liked hearing that answer, and it made me go, "I'm sad to lose that question," but I felt like enough schools gave it's a combo of both, or it's 50-50, or some version of that I just thought I don't need to keep necessarily asking this question every single time. I hope our regular listeners will kind of take that as a pretty universal truth, that it is a high percentage of skills are factored in and a high percentage of personality when it talks about how you get in. And of course, I'm praising Amanda and her MTCA philosophy so much. I love how Amanda talks about that idea of contrasting strengths. I guess that's my words, but the way she was talking about, I want to see contrast, but I want to see strengths. Of course, not shocking that she would come from this philosophy, having spent many years as an MTCA coach. But she basically gave the thesis of our Lacey Jordan interview. If you go back and listen to Lacey, that's exactly how she talks about the contrasting strengths. You also, if you prefer reading, all of you bloggers, you can check out my blog about hitting your home runs, what it is to hit your home runs. That idea of as much range and contrast as you possibly can while sticking with things that you're really excellent in. It's such a good rule of thumb for you to use when you think about, like, what do I bring in the room? Especially like Amanda said, when she says you can do 2 songs completely up to you. You have so much choice. And so it goes, how much choice, how much range? How do I think about it? A good rule of thumb is that idea of 2 contrasting strengths. We don't want contrast at the expense of strength. So don't show me, that thing that you're really good at and one thing that you're not good at, right? But we also don't want 2 great things that are exactly the same, because we'll sort of be like, oh, that's all they do. So as much contrast as possible while really sticking with your strength. That is the goal. And I just have to mention, because otherwise people will spin, when Amanda talked about those dreaded 3 groups of people that walk into the audition room. She talked about there's people who are quick no, people who are quick yes, and then the people I'm more curious about. But then I also thought she very well talked about, it's not as simple as those 3 groups either. That was just a way that she was saying them. Because of course you could break them down a bunch of different ways from there, and why you might see this monologue, why you might ask for a third song, why all those things, right? This is really just a means for me to say, at this time of year, please don't waste too much energy analyzing what it means when they ask you for that additional thing or whatever they do in the room. Try not to spend too much time analyzing what they do and what they say from the behind the table. Don't assume if they ask for a monologue, it means they are super interested. Or in this case, what Amanda said, she sort of described, if I ask for a monologue, maybe it means that I'm actually unsure, right? As a general rule of thumb, sure, I'll say in general, more time in the room is a good thing. It certainly means they're at least interested enough to learn more, which is going to put you in a category of people of either they really love you and they want to see more, or they're curious about you. That are both good things. But here's the thing that you all have to hear. This is very true. This is not something that we just say, because sometimes people think we're just saying it to them in the green room of like, no, it really could still mean you're in. When you have an in and out 4-minute audition, it absolutely can turn to a yes. We see it every year. Again, not to reference Lacey so many times, but I told that story of Lacey Jordan when she was my student, when she told me, I walked into Ithaca, I walked out, they were timing me, they asked me no questions, they said nothing. I know for sure I'm not getting into that school. And then she got in and got a huge scholarship, right? So If you walk out of Pace and Amanda doesn't ask for your monologue, where another school asks for 3 monologues, you should not assume that second school is much more interested in you than Pace. And that just goes across the board for all schools, right? And that's the important thing from this takeaway. I don't want you to now analyze, well, for Pace for monologue for this, is this true? Is this true, right? I could do 30 minutes on all the different things that you can successfully draw, which it's not that you can draw nothing, of course. What you shouldn't draw, we could get really deep into this. Got 20 years of experience doing this. I know a lot of what is helpful to you and was not helpful to you and what could make a difference. I do think one of the things I will always say, it is worth noting for yourself before you freak out, the differences between the experience of a walk-in audition and a scheduled appointment in terms of how much positive feedback that you might receive from a school. There's a big difference when a school is trying to convince you to apply to their school so they know the ball is in their court, that they have to do a little bit of schmoozing you and telling you how great you are and telling you what's great about their school and do you have any questions, right? Because they are wanting you to apply to their school. That's obviously a great thing when it happens in a walk-in. In the reverse, with a scheduled audition, the school already has your application and they already have their information and they know the ball is in their court, so they don't need to necessarily do this big, effusive, you're the greatest thing I've ever seen. They're going to give you an answer later, right? That's a big mistake many of our students make every year is they get this really positive experience in a walk-in and then not the same experience in a scheduled audition, and they assume that means a scheduled audition is not interesting in you. But the whole point, I did that little bit of, there's 2 of the 30 minutes we could do on this, but the big takeaway is that this is mostly wasted energy. Unlike professional auditions, you will actually get an answer from all these schools. We often get answers in professional auditions, but not always. Sometimes you just never hear, right? You're not in a case where you go, I guess I'll just never know what Pace thought of me. I'll know nothing, right? You're going to get an answer from all these schools, whether that's an in, whether that's a rejection, whether that's a wait list, whether that's a deferral, whether that's you're in the pool of consideration, but you're going to hear from all these schools. That the ball is in their court when you've auditioned for them, that you're going to hear back from them, right? So please don't obsess over what it means that they asked you this question, or what it means that you did 3 monologues and your friend did 2. Does that mean I'm definitely in? Or what it means that you went from one room to another room, or what it means that they gave you an adjustment, but they didn't give your friend an adjustment, right? Does that mean they think I'm good or they don't think I'm good? That's why they gave me an adjustment. All of that stuff, it's just not helpful for you to go down that path, right? I'm not saying it can't be fun. I actually think it can be really fun to do. And of course, it's natural. You want to know immediately, so you're going to spend some time analyzing it. I'm not saying you're not going to, right? And I will say, if you get positive momentum from the gossip part of it, more power to you. I'm not going to yuck your yum if you're like, this is really exciting to me. I'm just really building and fantasizing. It's really doing a lot for me because I just love thinking that means for sure that I'm in. Okay, great. If that's going to help you, I just want you to realize what you're doing is just spinning gossip. What you're doing is just speculating based on very little expertise. You not only are an amateur in this process, but you don't know these schools and the landscape and how this works. That if you're sitting there trying to analyze parents from outside the room based on what they say, based on the story your student tells, it's just speculation. It's analysis that it's not that it has zero bearing of truth, or there's no chance that it will relate to truth, but it is not going to necessarily be accurate. Given that you're going to be receiving an answer from them soon, it also doesn't have to be accurate is the whole point of this. You don't need to know on February 2nd, after your February 1st audition, what that February 1st audition is. You'll be hearing from them in March, right? So it's just, of all the things in the busy New York City Unifieds, I would not spend too much of your energy if it's wearing you out, obsessing and analyzing on all that stuff, right? If you can spend that energy somewhere else, preparing for your next audition, for instance, I would generally recommend it. I know I say that, and most of you won't be able to do that. You're still going to come into the green room and tell us all the stories of what does this mean and what do you think about that? Does that mean they hate me? Does that mean they love me? Right? You're going to still obsess over one school that said great job versus one school that said excellent job, and another school that offered you a chance to ask questions, another one that didn't, right? Which again is going to vary much more based on how the schools choose to conduct audition versus person to person, but even could vary person to person and doesn't necessarily mean that much. But at least now I can say I have properly warned you. And if you choose to spin in that gossip, then that's your choice that you're making against doctor's recommendation. Also, I just wanted to highlight that idea for you, of that idea that they are not turning people away from pre-screens that they want to see. This is especially now for maybe our junior listeners or people who are listening. If you're not listening live and maybe you're a senior, but it's in the August of your senior year or September of your senior year, right? This idea, when you talk about pre-screen timing, please don't think, there's always these nasty rumors that start that if you don't turn your pre-screens in early enough, they're going to fill up, right? It's not the way that it works. And Amanda's explicitly said, we're not like running out of spots for pre-screens, right? Whether that's because now Amanda talks specifically about they will actively add dates, right? They know about what they want to pass, but she said 700 to 900. So they're actively going to add dates. Plenty of other schools will do that too. That's not uncommon at all that you would do it that way. Or other schools will say, we're going to hit that number. Let's say they had the hard 800 number, but they're going to hit that number based on what their standard is. That's their job to figure out how to hit 800. They're not just going to pass the first 800 that they like and then go, sorry to the rest of it, right? The whole point of what the school is doing when they do figure out what is our application number and what is our pass rate, they're trying to make that pass rate reflect the number of slots they have available, right? It's just not the case that schools are going to pass 75% of the students they see until they fill up and then just stop, right? We do always talk about, and it's always our advice, I would not wait right up into the deadline. I do think right before the deadline, could it get a bit riskier, meaning that the percentage could dip slightly, right? If in general, a school is passing 25% of their pre-screens, and then they get a slightly higher applicant rate than they expect, could that number shrink as you get right up to the actual deadline itself to maybe now be, we can only pass 20% of these or 15% of these, right? As they get those days before the deadline. Sure, though many of these schools would just add slots if they needed to, right? But we're talking about edge cases there. Even in that strategy of going, hey, don't wait till 2 days before the deadline to turn it in because it could slightly reduce your chances. We're talking about it slightly reducing your chances. Every year we have students who, for whatever reason, need to turn in right before the deadline and pass right before the deadline, right? They are doing the pre-screens so that they can see the students they want to see. So always the idea of being really good on your pre-screen overrides the idea of timing. Though again, our advice, I would not wait until right before the deadline, timing wise. But I really appreciate it. Man, clearly speaking from experience there, saying, hey, we're not going to run out of slots. So don't panic and be like, if I don't send it in by October, there's going to be no spots left. That's just not how it works when you talk about these competitive schools. Okay. And the other numbers thing I just want to remind you of, since a lot of people gave me some positive, maybe you math majors out there, I don't know what it was, but you gave me some positive feedback about that top 10 episode we did as we broke down some of the math of how that works, right? Is just to remind you, for those of you who heard that scary number, and I know they said it again at Pace, of 2,000 to 800 to 32, right? When you heard okay, that's where we start and that's where we go to, and then that's where we get to. It sounds crazy, and they are crazy. Those are crazy numbers, right? It is a very competitive process, especially when you talk about an excellent competitive school like Pace, which sees a ton of great talent. But I do want to remind our math nerds out there, when you hear that number 32, just remember that number is their final class, not their total number of acceptances. So if it's 2,000 to get down to 700 or 900 pre-screens, to then get down to 32, the 2,000 to 700 to 900, that's directly accurate. That is basically what we're talking about. We talk about, what is that? It's a 40% some pass rate. That sounds like that's accurate, right? And that's going to be pretty much accurate across schools, those numbers. It's not a lot of wiggle room with there, right? But with basically all schools, there will be some amount of waitlist movement and likely some amount of over-acceptance. Not every school chooses to over-accept. They may accept exactly 32 and then go to the waitlist, or they may accept some number above 32 and then go to the waitlist as well, right? Or some choose to go to the waitlist less by doubling their acceptance class, whatever they choose to do, right? But if you hear from 2,000 to 32, a 1.5% acceptance rate, or 1.6%, I think it is, right? That's accurate in the way that most schools list it. So Pace is being completely genuine in the way they say it. That's how all the schools choosing to list it, right? They do that because it makes them seem the most competitive. And if other schools are doing it, they should do it that way too. It's fair, and that's how they do it, right? But when you think about that number yourself, with almost all of these schools, they are going to the waitlist at least somewhat. So if 32 offers, or maybe let's just say, for example, that Pace does 40 offers initially, 40 to yield 32, and then knowing I might need an additional 15, 20, whatever students off the waitlist, right? If 20 of those initial 40 original students end up choosing another program, which I'm not saying those numbers are accurate, but something like that, just for the sake of math, right? Because of course, each student can only go to one school. That acceptance is not like, well, if they chose to go to a different school over Pace, then I guess just nobody's going to fill that class. That slot's going to get filled so they can have 32 students, right? That 1.5% acceptance rate could really end up looking more like 2.5% or even 3%, depending on, is it 40 and 25 or which of those numbers in terms of the over acceptance and then in terms of the waitlist itself. Now, you might be like, Charlie, did you just do a 40-second monologue to tell me that it's actually 3% instead of 1.5%? And is that actually that much less scary than 1.5%? Probably not. I mean, 3% is still very competitive, but it is double. We're talking about double the acceptance rate. And it is still, when you talk about 3%, it's more competitive than Harvard academically. Yes, that is true. So that's kind of crazy. But it's not quite as bad. One, it's doubly less bad. And I will say, and the reason I want to do this at Pace, where those numbers I think are not, those numbers look good for Pace, whether 1.5 or 2% or 3, they all look great. But when you talk about schools that drop down the competitiveness tier, those numbers really do increase significantly, right? So when you're talking about some schools where the initial rate is 15%, but they are also over accepting and really going to the wait list, the numbers can relieve you a little bit in terms of going, wait a second, okay, there's all these people doing it, but they're all applying to many schools and they can only take up one slot. So it makes the actual acceptance rate not feel quite as terrifying and crazy as it could potentially feel when you hear 2,000 to 800 to 32, I'm screwed. I got a 1.5% chance. And no, I don't have them all charted out sitting on my computer somewhere, or I would be happy to share them with you. If I had it all charted out, I'm not keeping secret. I just am not tracking every single school and what their percentages are. Don't ask. You just have to, pester Jovan. I am as old people think. DM. What do you do on Instagram? DM Jovan. Don't DM me asking for the numbers chart for schools. Though anytime you want me to do a math lesson on this podcast, we sure can. But that will do it for another episode of Mapping the College Audition, produced by Meghan Cordier and Kelly Prendergast, with social and video editing by Jordan Rice. Please like and subscribe to us where you watch and listen. Hit us with that sweet rating and review if you appreciate a 2-hour episode with extra math involved. And follow us at Mapping the College Audition on Instagram. And as always, check us out at MTCA.com for help with your individual college process. To my young artists out there mapping their journeys, please trust that you're enough for the right school exactly as you are right now. Now keep striving. We'll catch you next week.